Hello there. Tonight, we open a quiet door into a story that most people remember for its loudest moment, a lamp lifted in the dark, and we let the softer part speak. This is the tale of Eros and Psyche, told the way moonlight tells things, slowly, without hurry, and in the order that helps the mind settle. There will be fields that breathe like sleeping animals, a house that opens for footsteps no one hears, a river that carries its own low music, and a path that goes down without frightening anyone. If you've heard this before, we will not compete with the old versions. We will simply walk beside them at a kinder pace. We begin with a girl whose name means soul, and a city that looked at her as if she were a lantern. We will not measure the jealousy, because jealousy is noisy. We will measure footsteps, hers, then others, the sort that arrive like a breeze and leave as if the room had taught them manners. A god will appear without trumpets. He will arrive the way warmth does, and he will carry a bow that prefers to be a secret. There will be rules, because stories and sleep both like rules, and there will be a breaking, because people do that. Even then, we will keep our hands open. We will fold the sharp parts into linen and put them where rest can find them. The way down will be a staircase with honest rails. The underworld, whose name is a door more than a thread, will agree to be walked in with steady shoes. We will see work that asks for patience rather than strength. Seeds sorted by the hour, will taken from the wind without teaching it to fight. Water lifted from a river that forgives the bucket for being small. Some tasks will be finished, and some will teach us that finishing is not the only way to be faithful. Where the story could run, we will let it stroll. Where the heart could race, we will ask it to hum. If you grow drowsy, that is correct. You may let the house of this story go on without you. If you remain awake, you may watch the little lamp of the plot move from room to room. A promise made in whisper, a promise kept when nobody was taking notes, a turning back that happens the way all turnings happen, too soon and exactly when they would. We will be kind to it. We will give it a chair. We will let morning decide what it means. For the first hour, there will be images, hills, doorways, a room that pours warm air, a set of small tasks lined up like cups. After that, the screen will darken and save its strength while the voice goes on. Let the night do its arithmetic. In, out, here, now, enough. If you sleep, you will not miss the ending. Endings in stories like this are simply beginnings with softer shoes. Close your eyes if you like. Keep them open if that is easier. Either way, we're ready to drift with Psyche and the quiet god who loved her into the parts people don't usually linger on. The hidden parts that were always there, waiting for someone to look gently. There is no storm tonight. The sky is clear and still, and lamplight does the work of the moon. On a low hill above the houses, an olive tree keeps its soft, silver leaves, and below it the streets lie like quiet ribbons between walls the color of bread. You can imagine the scene as a gentle oil painting, broad, calm strokes, edges softened by evening. Columns along a portico, shadows pooling where the stone is cool, and a single oil lamp breathing a small, steady fire near a doorway. They said the girl's name meant soul, and perhaps that is why the city paid attention to her the way good listeners do, by going quiet. She wore a simple chiton, the cloth falling in patient folds, sandal ties neat at her ankles. A thin himation shawl crossed her shoulders when the breeze remembered to rise. People did not turn their heads quickly when she passed. They did not gasp or point. They only became still, as if a lyre in a nearby courtyard had eased from melody into silence and wanted the street to join. On walls where the meander pattern walked its small right-angled steps, her shadow moved like water that had learned to keep its shape. Work ended without clatter. A potter's wheel coasted to a stop, the last cup of a day's batch cooling among other small cups. A loom accepted its bookmark stick, threads resting like rows in a field. From a stoa, a covered walkway, two old men completed the same conversation they had been finishing for years, and a child carried a kylix carefully with both hands, the way one carries night itself. No one hurried. The whole quarter seemed to practice the art of not waking a sleeping house. At the small temple on the corner, the laurel by the door had been watered. The leaves shone darkly. They held the lamp's reflection as if each leaf were a thin mirror trained in patience. Inside, a crater on a stone table still wore the ring a cup makes when it is set down gently. The priest had closed the shutters so the flame would behave. It did, and the air smelled of olive and a little beeswax. Someone had left 3 pomegranate seeds near the bowl, not for symbolism, only because people like to leave small things where the gods might look. Psyche did the ordinary kind of walking that stories forget to tell. Down one marble step, across the worn places where sandals had agreed to pass, under an arch whose paint had become more memory than color. Voices never rose. The night was not a stage with a spotlight. It was a courtyard with a lamp, and the lamp was enough. The city had seen processions and arguments and the loud praise that makes a person want to be elsewhere. This was not that night. This was a night for doors that opened because you arrived, not because you knocked. Rumors, the kind that make trouble, existed of course, as they do in every place where air meets ear. People said this girl was too beautiful, that Aphrodite might have noticed, that envy wanders in a thin cloak even on warm evenings. But we will fold that talk and put it on a shelf. Envy is noisy, and tonight is not for noise. If something divine paid attention, it would do so the way dawn pays attention to the sea, by touching it lightly until both think they thought of each other first. Her father, it is said, had asked an oracle long ago what should be done. Fathers ask when they do not know how to hold their fear without breaking it. The answer he heard was not soothing, and people enjoy repeating answers that are not soothing. But the family's house, this evening, did not act like a place that had been frightened by words. Bread cooled on a board. Water sat in an amphora near the door. A stool waited where stools wait when they are good at waiting. The women of the house arranged their hands the way careful people do when they are not sure whether to speak. Psyche stepped back into the street, and the portico accepted her shape as any shadow might. A moth visited the lamp and practiced not burning itself, which is the best thing a moth can practice. A boy somewhere practiced 2 notes on a flute and then decided that 2 notes were a form of perfection and stopped. A dog dreamed in the threshold of a carpenter's shop and wagged at a thing only dogs can see. The olive grove on the lower slope listened with its leaves, which is the only way trees know how to listen. If a breeze changed the air, it did not announce itself. It came the way patience comes, by already being there when you notice it. The old stories would have called it Zephyr, but names are only small baskets we use so our hands feel useful. What mattered was that the air learned Psyche's weight, learned the width of her shawl, learned how to carry without lifting, how to accompany without leading. The city did not suspect a miracle. The city suspected evening, and it was correct. She passed a doorway whose lintel carried a carved owl, the stone smoothed by the touch of years, and then another where someone had traced a tiny dolphin with a blunt nail. The paint on a household herm had flaked into stars. In a tiny shrine built into the wall, a terracotta Eros, one hand missing, wings perfect, washed with the expression all clay has, which is to say none. Psyche's shadow greeted him by becoming a little darker and then becoming itself again. At the edge of the houses, the road loosened into a path that liked being a path. It found the line between 2 small fields and followed it, then decided that the line between field and rock was also good. A cypress stood where the road had learned to pause, and beyond it a low ridge made a promise about the sea that it would keep in the morning. The moon behaved modestly and did not make an argument of her light. The lamp in Psyche's hand, or perhaps only the lamp inside the house she had just left, made a small circle in which her footsteps could count themselves. She stopped where stopping made sense. Not at a dramatic cliff, not at a temple draped with omens, but at a simple stone seat where people sit when they think and do not want to tire of standing. The air unrolled itself a little more and let something like comfort settle. If she spoke, the hillside kept the sentence. If she kept silent, the hillside kept that too. Either way, the night agreed to help. There are versions that quicken here, that bring the oracle's command like a drumbeat and hurry the girl toward it. We will not hurry. We will stand where she stands and learn what standing can do. The city has folded itself neatly behind her. The path ahead is only the color of dust. Somewhere, not near and not far, a house that does not yet have a name opens a door that no one touched. The breeze that is not yet a carrier touches the edge of her himation and remembers how to hold. The chapter can end without finishing. Some nights are like that. Tomorrow, or the next breath, we'll decide to move. For now, everything stays, and staying is a kind of travel the body understands. There is no storm tonight. The sky is clear and still, and lamplight does the work of the moon. From the low ridge where Psyche paused, the evening air remembers her shape and lifts it. Not roughly, not like a gust, but like a careful friend who knows how to help without making a ceremony of it. The old stories would call that friend Zephyr. You can imagine it as a soft hand under the shawl, not tugging, only taking the weight for a little while. The ground does not vanish. It simply recedes, and the path becomes a ribbon that wants to follow. Below, the olive trees write their small, silver sentences across the hill. Beyond them, a valley gathers itself into calm. The world does not tilt or blur. It just agrees to make room, and Psyche allows herself to be carried the short distance a person sometimes needs help traveling, the way a thought carries you from one room to another and you don't quite remember the doorway. The place waiting for her has the manners of an old house that has learned to welcome. Columns stand in an orderly row, not to impress, but to hold up a roof that remembers the heat of noon and gives it back in measured kindness. A stoa runs along the front like a shaded breath. The door does not creak or announce itself. It understands that entrances can be quiet. The latch lifts as if it had heard her coming for years. Inside, lamplight pools on a stone floor and finds the edge of a mosaic where dolphins chase each other forever without catching or being caught. A crater waits on a low table with a cup beside it, and a small bowl of figs sits near a sprig of laurel that someone cut with a careful knife. Another lamp, set a little deeper in the house, gives the walls their soft, amber color, as if the clay inside the plaster is feeling remembered fire and smiling about it. There are attendants here, though Psyche does not see them. You can tell by the way water is ready before you ask, by the way sandals appear where bare feet decide they would like to become less bare, by the way a chair places itself at the angle an aching back prefers. A basin is filled to the right height. A folded linen cloth is warmer than the air, as if held briefly by hands that don't want the credit. When she steps toward the inner court, the fountain is already speaking its one-sentence story, a repeating line that says only, now, and then, now, in a voice that makes the hours lie down. A breeze is allowed into the atrium and then told, kindly, where to stop so that the flame of the nearest oil lamp can do its work without argument. The house has a way of arranging things that feels less like magic and more like courtesy long practiced, like muscle memory belonging to stone. Psyche is weary from the kind of day that takes strength not because it was heavy, but because it was large. She lets the house teach her how to move through it. A passage shaded with painted vines suggests the path. A shoulder-high niche displays a terracotta Eros with a broken hand and perfect wings. A small room with a low bed offers a coverlet already folded back. She bathes in water that is exactly the temperature a person asks for when she doesn't know she has an opinion. Someone, no one, rinses the basin and sets it upside down to dry. Somewhere a lyre plays the notes a wall would play if it had been listening all day and wanted to hum without showing off. She eats slowly, bread whose crust remembers the oven, olives, a little cheese wrapped in a fig leaf. The cup is refilled without being lifted. You could call it invisible service. You could also simply call it care. Night takes shape the way sleep takes shape, by not insisting on itself, and with it comes a presence that chooses the door at the pace of a thought. Psyche does not see her husband. She hears him, the way you hear warmth when it moves from a lamp into the air. His voice is not thunder, nor is it the voice of a stranger standing too close. It is the kind of voice that knows how to make a room feel like it was always meant to be this size. He speaks her name as if he admired it for its lightness, then lets silence answer, as though silence were an equal partner in the conversation. They speak the way two people speak in a room where the day has generously decided to leave them alone, quietly, without proving anything, one simple thing following another. When he takes her hand, it is without surprise, not because he lacks feeling, but because real feeling has confidence in slow gestures. He asks very little of her, only that she trust what the night provides, and that she not search for a face before morning. Trust is a small word and a long practice. Psyche does not promise more than she can keep. She promises only to try, and trying is not nothing. In the mornings, if you can call them that, because the light inside this house does not hurry to declare itself. She wanders and learns the geography of being expected. The kitchen court smells of baked clay and time. Amphorae rest in the shade like tall, sleeping cats. Antechambers keep their echoes folded neatly. In one room, a shelf of scrolls leans without envy, allowing one title at a time to become interesting, then letting it go. She reads sentences that feel like walking along a meander border, right angle after right angle, restful in their persistence. In the garden, bees make little, golden promises and keep them, moving between rosemary and the small, white flowers that make the air behave. Doves know where to land so that no branch has to think too hard about physics. Psyche learns the path that returns to the same olive tree from 3 different directions, and learns that returning is sometimes more interesting than arriving. The world outside goes on with its own assignments. Here, the work is to breathe, to notice, to accept, to set a cup down where circles are already waiting to be drawn. Loneliness visits, as it visits any house that gives a person time. It visits politely at first, looking around to see where it might sit. Psyche thinks of her father and mother, of the sisters who learned their steps in the same room she did, and of the women who shared spindle and story and the useful gossip that keeps an afternoon from falling asleep in the wrong way. Her husband hears the weather inside her and tells her the truth plainly, that invitation can be a door and also a draft, that love and fear sometimes share a cloak, that not every visitor is a friend. He does not forbid, he cautions. He asks that she wait, that she let the marriage grow its own walls before opening them from the outside. His voice is gentler than his advice, and the gentleness is the part she believes. She says she will wait. She means it, for now. The house, which cannot help eavesdropping because walls are made of listening, adds its own small counsel by offering her a task that is not a task, to sort the hours the way one sorts river stones into pleasing shapes. She becomes, for days, the clerk of her own ease. Evenings become ritual without becoming routine. Lamps are trimmed. A bowl of water is set near the threshold because coolness is a good guest. The sound of sandals in the corridor is not a sound so much as a shape in the air. He arrives. They talk about the things people talk about when they are not telling their secrets, but are telling everything else. What the moon did with its light, how the garden persuades bees, how sleep decides which dreams to display and which to keep backstage for another night. When she laughs, the laugh arrives a half-breath after the joke, as if it had to collect itself at the door. When he touches her hair, it is with the curiosity of someone who wants to know how another person arranges the world around her face. They do not use the word promise more than once. They let the flame do the promising, steady and small, and perfectly responsible for its size. A week passes by becoming a single long day that happens to pause. The house teaches her little etiquettes, where to set a lamp so shadow will fall in the place shadow prefers, how to lift a jar so the handles are not insulted, which step in the stair takes the heel more kindly. She learns the song the fountain keeps pretending it just made up. She learns that olives improve by being looked at without judgment. She learns that some doors are not closed against you. They are closed for you, the way an eyelid closes for an eye to keep out grit. When she misses the women's voices of her old house, a cool room offers a basket of unspun wool and the kind of spindle that does not punish a beginner. Spinning can be the mind's lullaby. The thread grows between fingers trained today and fingers that remember yesterday. And by the time the thread reaches the other hand, the thought that needed to be thought has finished thinking itself and decides to rest. One night. How many nights later the house refuses to number. Her husband sits on the bed and asks her to listen the way one listens when the lamp has just been adjusted and the flame seems to be choosing a version of itself. He speaks of the world as it appears to people when they look too closely at what frightens them. He has seen that world from angles she will never have. He does not brag about that sight. He worries about it on her behalf. He tells her that a face can be a gift and a trap, that a name is a door, and some doors are best opened after the room has been aired. He admits that he has not given her his face not because it is unworthy, but because he wants the house they are building not to be arranged entirely around it. He asks for the kind of trust that can be practiced in small circles. Trust this hour, trust this bed, trust this breath, and later we will trust the longer things. She is quiet, not because she is unsure, but because quiet is the correct size for the request. Sometimes she answers with the back of her hand laid against his shoulder. Sometimes the answer is only that she does not pull her hand away. Morning returns, and with it the practice of living. Psyche learns to pour water from an amphora so that no drop touches the floor. In return, the floor in its stone manners gives back coolness to her feet. She learns that a certain laurel can be persuaded to offer one leaf if asked properly, and that the leaf can make a pot of stew remember it is a cousin of a forest. She learns which scrolls enjoy company and which prefer to be read alone. In a storeroom, she is introduced to a row of pomegranates set to ripen on a shelf, each the size of a closed fist, each wearing a crown that looks hand-carved by patience. The house does not keep her busy. It keeps her gently occupied, as one keeps a small bird from flying into a window by drawing a thin curtain. The hours pass without complaint. If the urge to measure them rises, the fountain writes its line on the stone again. Now, now, now. When evening comes again, it comes like a person you know by the way he walks, not by seeing his face. He brings the smell of the outer air with him, the clean, faint dust that clings to sandals, the green breath of olive leaves. They speak another long while, and then the conversation becomes the kind of silence that is not empty, but clearly busy arranging everything you will think in the morning. He speaks of families gently. He does not prod. He tells her there will be a day to open the doors and let familiar voices come into this quiet place. He asks that the day not be tomorrow. He says it the way a physician asks you to sleep one more hour before getting up, knowing you might disobey in a week and loving you anyway. She gives him the only permission she owns, the permission to hope she can do the right thing later. The lamps decide, without being told, to lower themselves a little. Time seasons itself. A breeze bends the cypress and straightens it again. The meander border on the wall completes another patient lap around the room. Psyche's hands learn the measure of the bedclothes and the weight of the clay cup and the softness of the shawl that is never where she left it, because it always moves to where it is wanted next. The house believes in her. You can tell by the way it keeps offering the exact chair at the exact moment a person wants to sit. The nights believe in her too, and in what she can keep without seeing. The man made of warmth believes in her most of all, or so the air says when he is gone, and it needs a word to explain itself. We could hurry the story from here toward interruption, toward the afternoon in which sisters stand at the edge of a valley calling her name, toward advice that sounds like concern and dresses like fear. Let that wait. Let tonight finish being tonight. Let the house do what good houses do. Watch without staring, hold without clutching, and learn the people who sleep inside it well enough to give them back to themselves in the morning. Psyche closes her eyes in a room that keeps promises as a hobby. Somewhere in the deep of the house, a lamp pinches its flame smaller and smaller until it becomes exactly the size a dream needs to see by. There is no storm tonight. The sky is clear and still, and lamplight does the work of the moon. The same soft air that carried Psyche to the threshold now lives in the house like a good neighbor, present, useful, and polite. If you listen for it, you hear nothing dramatic, only the small grammar of a place that has learned serenity. The fountain's patient syllable, the wick trimmed with a quiet click, sandals put side by hands that do not bother to be seen. The days have begun to fold into one another with the tender accuracy of linen stacked in a chest. and the knights arrive as if they had been waiting just outside the door, coats brushed, voices lowered, promises content to be small. Her husband keeps the rule they agreed upon with the grace of someone who believes rules are furniture, not chains. He comes when the lamps have been encouraged to behave and the last cup has drawn its ring on the table. He speaks as people speak who trust the silence to do half the work. He asks what the garden decided and how the bees voted and what the olive tree whispered only to her. She answers with the unimportant things that become important in a house made for resting. That the laurel gave one leaf and then made a ceremony of being done. That the bread chose a new color for its crust. That the doves invented a disagreement and solved it by sharing the same spot 2 heartbeats apart. Sometimes they laugh quietly and let the laugh finish its circle before starting another thought. There are evenings when the conversation is simply a warm hand resting near hers on the coverlet, and the conversation understands it has been spoken. Psyche learns the music of him in fragments the way a person learns a city, by landmarks first, then by the shortcuts between them. She learns the weight of his step when he is tired and the way tiredness makes his voice closer to the ground without making it heavy. She learns the smell of air after he has moved through it. Something like cedar warmed by a lamp and honey remembered by a jar. She learns the sound of feathers arranging themselves in a room that prefers not to notice. It is not a rustle so much as a rearrangement of silence, as if the air were folding itself to make space. Once, when the lamp flame lowers involuntarily and then lifts again, she feels a breeze that is not the door and understands that wings sometimes think with the body's whole weather, which is a kind of intelligence. The temptation to look is not a shout. It is a tap on the shoulder that is easy to pretend you did not feel. It arrives when she is most at ease, like a thought that mistakes comfort for permission. The mind is generous with reasons. It tells her that a face is only another way of saying a name, and she already knows the name. It tells her that her trust would enjoy being decorated with proof. The house offers counter-arguments in its own language. It sets the lamp farther from the bed and makes the shadow between them wider, so that any reaching would need to be done on purpose, not accidentally. It moves the small oil flask to a shelf that requires 2 hands, as if to say that curiosity should never be a reflex. The fountain, being a practical philosopher, repeats now in a way that makes later feel safely distant. Psyche hears both sides and decides, each night anew, to let the question sleep beside her without waking it. Days perform their errands with the dignity of small trades. She learns to grind grain without scolding the stone for being slow. The stone, in return, gives the meal a texture that finds flavor in being ordinary. She stirs a pot that would prefer to do its own stirring and is pleased to be allowed to do it with her. She pairs scrolls with the chairs that enjoy them, because some texts like the garden light and others want the cool companionship of a wall. She trims the lamp before dusk and keeps a sliver of char in a jar, because someone once told her that saving a little of what burns is a way to teach moderation to fire. When wool is brought to her from the storeroom, she lets the spindle remember its work and has the patience to correct it only after it has tried. Spinning gives the hours a cord to climb, and the hours, grateful, stop wandering. At times, a tender ache visits the room the way twilight does, predictably, without insistence. She wants to share this unremarkable peace with the lives that taught her how to notice it. The mother who measured dough with one hand and advice with the other, the father who could fix a hinge with a look, the sisters whose voices built a little theater over the day's simple chores. Longing is not disloyalty. It is how memory keeps the chairs warm for people who might come back. She tells him this in the language of touch and in the longer language of listening. He does not forbid, he understands. He says that houses must grow their own weather before they can welcome storms of opinion, and that love asks for privacy in the beginning, not to hide, but to learn the exact shape of its room. Sometimes, before he arrives, Psyche walks the interior world the way one walks a cloister, slowly, letting each step find its home. She traces the mosaic dolphins with her eyes and allows them to be happy without chasing anything. She visits a small shelf where someone has placed 4 stones the size of figs, each from a different part of the valley, each with a mood of its own. The river's stone, smoothed into agreement. The hillside stone, rough with purpose. The road stone, learning to be round. The garden stone, freckled with the past. She gives them each a finger's press and thinks ridiculous things like, "Thank you." And the stones, stubborn and excellent, refuse to react, which is comforting. She passes a household shrine with a winged boy in terracotta, and even though his eyes are merely indentations where someone once pressed a tool, she feels seen in the way one feels seen by a pattern that recognizes you as the right piece it needed. When he comes, the house breathes differently, like a room that knows which coat belongs on which peg. The lamp flame approves by steadiness. He does not touch her first. The air seems to ask permission on his behalf, and when permission arrives, it arrives as ease rather than as proof. He tells gentle stories that wander the way a garden path wanders. Here is a vine that believed a wall loved it. Here is a swallow that relocated a nest because it preferred the wind on Tuesdays. Here is a child who learned that bread rises because it wishes to be taller when it sees the oven flame. He never says he has traveled farther than stories usually travel. He lets the stories pretend they belong to any passerby who learned to notice them. When she asks if he ever tires, he answers with something like a smile you can hear. He says he is patient enough to let patience teach him, and that is a beautiful way of saying yes without saying yes. The question of seeing him becomes less a question and more a guest that never overstays, because it never sits at all. She understands that to see is not only an act of the eye, it is an act of the story you are willing to tell afterward. She is not ready to host that larger narrative, not because it would be terrible, but because it would be large, and large things should be welcomed by rooms that have practiced. She spends an afternoon with a lamp that needs cleaning and a wick that deserves trimming, and discovers that a person can be faithful in the direction of a very small object and discover, later, that the faithfulness was practiced for something whose name you do not need yet. On another day, she enters the most interior of the rooms and finds a table set with 4 plain tasks that look like courtesy disguised as work. There is a basket of almonds to be cracked without anger. There is a coil of twine that wants to be untied by patience and not by cleverness. There is a piece of cloth that needs mending where a fold wore it thin. There is a small spill of flour that absolutely refuses to be swept until it has been addressed respectfully with gratitude and then asked to move. She attends to these as one attends to guests who never admitted they were guests. She thanks the almonds for being exactly hard enough, loosens the knot by apologizing for whoever tied it too tight last year, teaches the needle to follow the thread rather than pull it, and persuades the flour with humor. When she is done, nothing looks different except the air, which has learned a new way to be clean. Evenings elongate into a kind of twilight that feels intentional, as if the lamps and the sky had their own treaty. He speaks once about names, in the comfortable tone of a person thinking out loud. He says that the more you name a thing, the more you think you can move it with your mouth, and some things require being moved with your life instead. He tells her that love prefers verbs to adjectives, and that he would rather do the verb of loving her than give her the adjective of his face and watch that adjective try to run the house. She considers this while watching the flame perform its endlessly persuasive argument for staying small. She decides the flame must have attended good schools and simply repeats its lesson. Nights together become, without being labeled, a wedding rehearsal the gods might envy for its lack of spectacle. There is a kindness of hands and a courtesy of breath, and afterward the world is not a different shape, but somehow easier to carry. She wakes in the latter part of night when dreams are diplomatic and learns to tell the difference between the weight of his sleep and his absence. Both are soft, but one has an argument with the sheet and the other does not. On a morning when she wakes before the lamps are convinced, she finds on the bedside stool a small object like a gift that changes its mind and becomes ordinary while you look at it. A rose thorn wrapped in thread, perhaps, or a feather's edge, or a pebble that thinks it used to be part of the moon. She puts it in a tiny bowl with 2 other almost gifts and decides not to decide what they are. Naming is for later. News from the outer world arrives the way news should arrive, slowly, with most of its appetite removed. A traveler's voice filters in from the road while she is in the garden and says that in the city there is talk, that sisters ask after her in the way family asks, with concern that has learned to dress itself in advice. She hears this with a heart that is not made of stone, which is to say she feels something move inside her that would like to be two people at once. The house hears too. It responds by opening a room she has not tried, a room with a long bench and a window that understands the mathematics of afternoon. In that window, a bird writes a short letter about distance and then erases it with its wings. She sits and reads what the bird meant. It is a letter that says, "Come when you can, and if you can't, make the place where you are into the place where you would have met." That night she tells her husband she would like, someday soon, to allow the path to find its way to her father's door and for voices that know her from before to come in and make this quiet place a little noisy, just to see if the place can survive it. He listens in the way trees listen, by supporting the sky while you speak. He says yes to someday, and yes to soon, and yes to making sure that love does not become a private language no one else can translate. He says no only to sudden, and he says it with the gentleness of someone who has found that sudden breaks cups and also breaks the habit of trust. She accepts the calendar made of words he offers. She closes the window. The window, being a good window, continues to show her what it would show if it were open, and that is enough. The next days are a rehearsal for being brave without spectacle. Psyche teaches herself to walk to the threshold and stop, to step one pace into the garden and then come back, because the fountain has something urgent to say in a language only the stone understands. She tells herself stories about seeing and not seeing, most of them true and all of them helpful. She holds the lamp in both hands and practices not lighting it the way a singer practices not singing until the right moment. She tells the lamp a joke about curiosity having poor table manners, and the lamp, being a lamp, does not laugh. It allows the joke to warm the metal just enough to be remembered. On an evening that will belong to memory without trying, he arrives with a stillness that has nothing to do with reluctance. He is fully here, the way a garden is fully itself after rain you did not see. He takes her hand and tells her that there are promises people make that are really guesses with fancy clothes, and there are promises people make that are simply accurate descriptions of what they can do. He prefers the second kind and tries to live there. He says he can promise that leaving her will never be an act of boredom, and that returning will always be an act of intention. When someone says something like that in a room this quiet, the room becomes a witness. The lamp does not flicker. The air takes notes. If you were to stand outside the house and look in, you would not see a spectacle. You would see two people practicing the sacrament of not rushing. You would notice that the evening knows what it is about. You would learn, if you stayed long enough, that trust is often a calendar more than a door, and that calendars, when kept, turn into doors on their own. For now, the door remains politely closed to faces. The nights keep coming, patient and exact. The house keeps making a case for gentleness by simply being good at it. Psyche keeps her question in a drawer and opens it sometimes the way one opens a drawer just to make sure it still opens. When she shuts it again, the click is soft, and the drawer accepts her choice without sulking. And somewhere beyond the olive grove, in the humankind of world, a path is beginning to remember her sister's footsteps, not with hurry, not with panic, only with that attentive neutrality that makes tomorrow possible. There is no storm tonight. The sky is clear and still, and lamplight does the work of the moon. The day had ended the way good days end in this house. Bread cooling on a board, the fountain reciting its single syllable, the room deciding which shadows it preferred to keep. Psyche had folded the linen for the bed and smoothed the coverlet with the kind of attention that teaches the hands to think kindly. She was as ready for a quiet evening as a lamp is ready for its wick. From the road below came the sound that a visit makes before it calls your name. Sandals choosing stones, voices agreeing to be smaller than they are, the soft clink that happens when bracelets think about speaking and then decide to be modest. Her sister's steps were not stranger steps. She knew them the way a house knows its own corners. The air in the portico lifted, as if the stoa wanted a better view, and the door, which had learned courtesy as an art, offered its latch. The women entered half curious and half armed with news. They were the kind of sisters who love with a long history, generous in memory, experienced in the art of advice, practiced at the music of worry. The house treated them as it treats everyone who means well even when they do it clumsily. Water appeared. Chairs arranged themselves. A plate of figs performed the diplomacy fruit performs when it does not want to be a metaphor. They admired more than they said. Fingers touched the mosaic's dolphins without quite touching. Eyes measured the grain of the door as if doors could be weighed. One sister turned the little crater a hand's breadth to the left, and then a hand's breadth back again, as if to prove to herself that moving things was still possible in a room like this. Praise came in small, reluctant sentences that sounded, to a trained ear, like envy translated into politeness. Psyche felt the old warmth of belonging rise in her. How the body recognizes a voice it grew beside, then felt, beneath it, the cooler current that had kept her steady these last nights. They asked the question anyone would ask in a house where lamps are trimmed and voices are carefully kept low. And your husband? Not rudely. Simply the way daylight asks what you intend to do with it. Psyche answered in the truth she could carry. That he comes at night as quietly as comfort arrives. That his voice knows how to make a room the correct size. That she has not yet seen his face because the rule of the place is trust first, names later. Her sisters listened in the way people listen when information does not sit comfortably in the chair they had brought for it. One nodded. One frowned kindly. Each carried her own weather. Advice arrived as advice usually does, wrapped in concern, fastened by a story. They had heard things, of course. Oracles were quoted, dreams retold. The old pattern of fear laid like a cloth under everything else so that any cup you set down would sit upon it. Be careful, said one. Be clever, said the other. A face withheld is seldom a gift. They agreed, and then walked that sentence back part way with a smile because they loved her. They did not accuse, they warned. Warning is a love language that keeps its voice. They drew the outlines of a creature made of rumor, great and dark and hungry for not being known. They asked her, gently, whether a lamp was ever created for anything but seeing, whether love, if it is honest, can live forever in a house with its eyes closed. Psyche did not answer quickly. She poured water, and the water made a circle where it landed, and she looked at that circle because it offered the kind of order a person wants when other orders are undone. She said she would think. The sisters kissed both her cheeks and blessed her with the old household blessing that mentions bread and sleep in the same breath. They left the way good visitors leave, with footsteps that do not confess their speed. The door, having done its work, settled again into the shape of a rectangle. The house breathed once. Evening gathered itself the way a cloak gathers itself across shoulders. The room performed its nightly rehearsal for peace. Psyche walked slowly from lamp to lamp, making small corrections the way a hand corrects a child's hair without meaning to scold. She told herself a practical story about curiosity, that it is neither saint nor villain. It is simply a guest who requires supervision. She told herself a truer story about love, that the faith she had practiced these weeks was a habit that deserved the dignity of being kept. Then she told herself a third story, smaller, private, that asked for one more kind of seeing, the sort that quiets a frightened corner of the mind so it will stop inventing monsters to entertain itself. Her husband came, and the room adjusted its grammar to include him. Conversation learned how to become silence without leaving. Hands learned how to ask and answer. Nothing in his manner pleaded for secrecy. Nothing in hers threatened to interrogate. And yet the small thought her sisters had brought with them, folded as neatly as extra linen in a chest, lay under everything. It did not protest. It simply existed, and because it existed it asked, with the politeness of a persistent pupil, to be addressed. When he slept, sleep honored him. It arranged itself around his breaths, which kept a slow mathematics. The lamp on the far table behaved, its flame no taller than the nail of a little finger. Psyche stood beside the bed and allowed the quiet to name itself. Trust first, names later. The rule had done its good work. But there are nights when keeping a rule requires a courage that looks, from the outside, like breaking it. She did not reach for the lamp as a thief reaches. She reached as a person might reach toward a window to confirm the absence of storm, to reassure the smaller self that grows busy in darkness and then refuses to rest. The oil jar felt warm from its own patience. She lifted the lamp as one lifts an infant whose sleep must be respected. The flame produced a mild gold that would not insult anyone. She took a step, another. The room enlarged without changing its shape. She could smell beeswax, the clean, threadbare scent of linen aired often, and the faint cedar that clung to the wooden chest. She did not hurry. Hurrying belongs to other stories. He lay with the openness of a person convinced of safety, shoulders unguarded, the hand near his throat relaxed, lashes uninterested in vigilance. What the lamp revealed was not a secret kept against her, but a thing that had been waiting to be seen by eyes strong enough to bear it. Youth, yes. Beauty, yes, but not the boastful sort. The kind of beauty that looks like clarity, features arranged the way good laws are arranged, for usefulness. The bow at rest, the quiver asleep as if it too trusted the hour. A soft outline at the shoulder that was not quite human and did not need to be. Not a thread. Only a fact the world had decided to include. Psyche's breath changed itself into something she could ride like a quiet boat. The hand that held the lamp learned a new stillness. She understood in a single heartbeat both things, that love had not deceived her, and that she had failed love by choosing this brightness before it asked to be chosen. The body has its own ways of punctuating revelation. A drop of oil, no larger than a lentil, shaped by gravity and foolish hope, warmed itself along the spoon of the lip and then let go. It felt the small distance events sometimes need in order to commit. It touched skin. It became history. He woke as a person wakes who recognizes the world before opening his eyes. There was no thunder in his movement. If the air stirred, it did so to make courtesy. He looked at her the way a lamp looks at the hand that placed it, with gratitude first. Then he looked at the lamp. Then his gaze went past both, to the rule they had held between them like a simple bridge. He did not speak quickly. He measured gentleness and poured it, because gentleness is the only vessel that will hold sorrow without breaking. Psyche, he said, and the name took care of itself, coming to stand between them like a third person who has earned the right to attend. You did not need to fear. The face was not a test. The waiting was the test, and you had nearly taught the night how to keep it. He said other things a lover says when he wants neither to accuse nor to excuse, when he wants the truth to remain in the room without bringing its weapons, that love cannot live alongside suspicion without learning bad habits, that the door between seen and unseen swings both ways and must not be yanked, that trust is the recipe for a house, and houses with missing ingredients collapse no matter how beautiful their facades. She did not plead. She put the lamp back in its place and set the jar beside it, and covered the flame with the small cap that spares a wick from drama. Then she returned and knelt, not to beg, but to become the size indicated by the hour. Words came to her one at a time and lined up like pilgrims. I am sorry. I was afraid of my fear. I wanted to calm the part of me that does not listen even when I am telling its stories. She said she could try again at the discipline of not knowing, that she could practice a longer patience if given another chance. He listened with the fairness of someone who had, himself, asked for patience many times from heaven and from earth. What happens next is told differently in different houses. Some say the house vanished instantly, offended by light where light had not been invited. Some say the wind remembered its job and carried him upward as if he were a feather and the whole room a palm. Some say a voice was heard, neither his nor hers, repeating an old line about love and trust in a tone that made furniture want to become better furniture. What Psyche remembered was this: a sudden absence shaped exactly like him, and then the much larger absence that followed hard upon it. The way a world rearranges itself when a purpose steps outside. The bed kept its shape, but not its story. The fountain continued its note for another heartbeat, and then found it had nothing to say. The lamp, capped, cooled with dignity. Morning discovered her not in the perfect house, but on a slope the color of olive wood, under a sky that had done nothing wrong. The mosaic was gone. The crater had become a smooth stone half buried in dust. The door had given itself back to air. She sat very still because stillness is the only skill that presents itself quickly when the others have gone out without leaving a note. If she wept, the hillside kept that private. If she did not, the hillside kept that too. After a time that can only be measured by crickets, she stood. There were two choices, and they were the same: to go forward. She spoke aloud, not because anyone needed to hear, but because speaking makes a road one half step less lonely. She said his name and said that she would learn to deserve it. She said that if the gods required proof of her steadiness, she would carry the idea of him like a lamp, carefully, even when unlit. She said she would go where a person goes when she has harmed what she loves, but not destroyed it, toward the teacher who is hardest to please and therefore most honest. That meant Aphrodite. The thought made her small. Small is a good size for traveling. Walking took longer in this new geography where courtyards had been replaced by hills and benches by stones that refused to pretend. The sun arranged itself fairly. A shepherd looked up from mending his strap and nodded because nodding is the language you use for other people's storms. At a spring she cupped her hands and learned that water can be both cold and kind. She paused under a laurel where the shade kept a careful ledger. Every few moments she told herself the sentence that would be her metronome for many days. One step more, and we will see what the next step is. By late light, she found a small shrine at a crossroads, the sort made of a pillar with a square head. A simple herm whom passers-by had fed with handfuls of grain and 2 coins left face up. Psyche placed between the coins a promise folded into silence. The pillar, being stone, accepted without a blessing and without a curse, which is often the fairest way to be. She slept on the ground with her head near the base and dreamed not of faces but of tasks that begin small and discover, as they go, that they are very large. Morning made the decision for her that morning always makes. Begin. She started down toward the coast, where rumors say the goddess walks when she wants to be admired for reasons even she cannot name. The path did not help. It asked for a foot, and then the other, and gave back no assurances. Birds wrote short essays about continuing, and then signed them with their wings. Psyche nodded as if to students whose homework she would read later. She kept going. At a bend where an olive tree had grown fond of its own shadow, she heard a voice that belonged to no throat. It was the kind of voice the world uses when it decides to be useful. If you are wise, it said, kindly, not as a lecture. You will not attempt this alone. Ask ants for one sort of work. Ask reeds for another. Ask eagles when the bucket is too small for the river. Ask the dark for a favor only the dark can grant. She looked around and saw only the world being itself. Soil making itself ready, stems rehearsing green, a beetle carrying the moon upside down on its back. All right, she said to everything. I will ask, but first I will arrive. She arrived in the late part of day when the sun rehearses saying good night and says it well. The temple was what temples are, columns doing their hereditary task, steps worn into a sentence by feet, offerings thinking about the hands that had set them there. In a recess made for kneeling, she stood. Kneeling came when it was ready. She said the goddess's name without decoration. She said, simply, that she had erred where love is afraid, and that she wished to become the kind of person who errs less. She asked for work because work is the language Aphrodite speaks when she is inclined to be merciful. The air turned 1 degree cooler, which in a sacred place is the same as an answer. A woman of impossible composure stepped from the shadows that are not shadows. Her beauty arranged the way law is arranged in a city that requires order to survive. She did not smile. Her mouth considered smiling and chose accuracy instead. She looked Psyche over as a craftswoman inspects a tool she did not ask for, but which might yet be useful. You have bothered my son, she said at last, in a tone that could have meant 100 things. You have bothered yourself. Both are boring to me. What is not boring, she continued, letting the sentence find its own sandals, is correction. You will be corrected in 4 pieces. If you finish 3 and fail 1, we will call the sum honest. If you finish all, we will consider you a student worth keeping. She led Psyche to a room with a low door and a wide floor where someone had poured a small mountain of seeds: barley, wheat, millet, lentils, poppy, rye, an argument of grains that had been separated in their fields and united only so they could be told to undo their union. Sort these before the lamp dies, said the goddess. You will use no trick. You will use no tears. You will use the small machinery of patience. If you are clever, borrow friends who understand this better than you do. I do not care, so long as it is done. Psyche looked at the heap and felt the reasonable despair one feels upon meeting a problem that has no sense of proportion. Then she remembered the voice by the olive tree. She knelt and made the sign a person makes when inviting a meal to behave. She said, quietly, into the pile of seeds, I am unskilled. Who among you likes sorting? Ants, who consider themselves underpraised, arrived from a crack none of the gods had noticed because gods rarely bend that low. They did not salute. They did not lecture. They fell to work, taking the world apart with a speed that did not look like speed because it belonged entirely to attention. Psyche served them by staying out of their way and by nudging stray grains toward the place where useful lines were forming. The goddess returned to a floor that looked as if a careful rain had fallen in different directions at once and then dried into compartments. She did not compliment. She conceded. 1, she said, and the word behaved like a number. Strict, impersonal, exact. Tomorrow will. Golden, as you might expect. Gather it without bleeding. She left without a gesture. Psyche slept as well as a person can sleep on a temple floor after being told she will live the next day. The ants went home unimpressed with themselves, which is the virtue that keeps ants prosperous. Morning again. The goddess indicated a meadow below a sunlit cliff where sheep the color of coins had decided to be their own sun. Bring me their fleece, she said, collected from their anger without participating in it. Psyche walked to the edge and looked, and what she saw was not an opening for heroism, but a demonstration in how easily bodies can be harmed when they are not careful. The reeds along the brook moved as if they too had been given a task. She asked them what task it was. They told her to wait until the animals, being foolish and glorious, had tangled their wool on the thorns that hid in the shade. Collect what trouble has already removed, whispered the reeds, and call it a harvest. She waited. Time did its excellent work. She gathered the golden fiber from the quiet places and brought it back without a scratch. The goddess, who hates losing, hid her satisfaction the way a miser hides a coin he knows he must eventually spend. 2, she said. Tomorrow you will fetch water from a river that dislikes buckets and has been known to punish them for trying. Do not bore me with drowning. Then she dismissed Psyche with the smallest possible angle of her wrist, which in palaces is the same as shouting. Night, again, without storm. The sky, cooperative. The lamp, civil. Psyche lay on the temple's cool floor and learned how stone can be a friend when heat must be taught humility. She thought of the house that was gone the way a widow thinks of a voice that will not visit. She did not accuse herself again. She did not forgive herself thoroughly either. She set both impulses aside and let sleep be the third thing, the thing that keeps the other 2 from becoming noisy. Somewhere beyond the columns, the sea rehearsed a line it would need for tomorrow's play. Somewhere above the columns, the moon kept its post without intruding. Somewhere within the columns, a soul decided that work might be another face of love, and that learning to carry it gently could be a way of walking toward the person whose absence had measured the day. In the morning she would stand at a cliff and consider an eagle. She would learn how high a kindness can fly when asked properly. She would return what only where sweat proves effort, not where rivers make fools. She would be given, after that, a small box with a lid that keeps secrets for a living and instructions that will tempt any human mind to add its own line to the script. But for tonight, this last hour of the first hard turn, she slept as the steady sleep of a person who has made a treaty with her task. The lamp kept watch. The temple kept its cool. The world, having been told what it needed to know, allowed itself to grow quiet enough to help. There is no storm today. The sky is clear and still, and lamplight, when it is needed, will do the work of the moon. Morning spreads itself like linen across the temple steps, and Psyche rises with the quiet certainty of someone who has decided that the day will be asked politely and answered in the same manner. The room where the first heap of seeds became many tidy fields is swept. The basket that carried golden wool from the shade sits folded, remembering success without boasting. Aphrodite appears in the measured way fine clocks appear in orderly houses, exact, composed, and uninterested in applause. She names the third task as if she were naming a recipe. Bring me water from the black river that keeps its own counsel, the one that circles the hidden country and will not be ladled by ordinary hands. The goddess indicates a small vessel, narrow-necked, pale as a shell, too delicate, Psyche thinks, for any quarrel with a cliff. From the source, Aphrodite adds, as though the word source were an address with a friendly door. Do not drown. That would be predictable. The goddess turns away, which is how some people end their sentences when they are sure of their punctuation. Psyche takes the vessel the way one takes a secret and wraps it in the simple promise, I will try. The path to the high water is not dramatic. It is only consistent, the way stone is consistent about being stone. A long olive slope brightens and then levels. A goat track learns to accept human feet. The day warms by agreement rather than by argument. Psyche walks the way a careful hand draws a meander on a border. Turn, turn, advance. Turn, turn, advance, finding that the world likes a pattern. She thinks about what it means to fetch something from a place that disapproves of being fetched from. She thinks about buckets and rivers and the small pride both have in their shapes. When the cliff finally presents itself, it does not lunge at the sky. It simply stands up straight and lets height do what height has always done. A sound rises from below, not a roar, not a shout, only a wide hush, as if 100,000 fine brushes were being drawn gently over silk and never tiring. The water moves down its own thought, and the air smells of fern and shadow, and the surface of the stone under her palm is cool enough to teach the hand humility. At the edge where a person would be foolish to step any nearer, the river shows its character. It is black the way polished obsidian is black, not empty, but full of depth that refuses to be counted. The fall is a narrow throat in the rock, white where it fidgets, dark where it remembers itself. Mist gathers in a disciplined cloud that beads the face and then leaves without being thanked. Psyche places the little shell-colored vessel on a shelf of stone and watches the distance calculate itself. She is not a swimmer today, and the river is not an audience. She waits, because the morning has already taught her that waiting is a kind of tool. She speaks, not loudly, because cliffs prefer manners, into the wet, bright air. I have been told to carry what cannot be carried. If there is intelligence here that does not mind being asked, I am asking. The question does not ripple anything. It simply agrees to stand where it has been placed. From the high, pale sky, a shape unthreads itself from light and becomes a living geometry, a wide span of wing, a neck the color of old honey, eyes that know the maps wind keeps. The eagle's arrival is not a strike. It is a landing in the air, a mastery of hovering that makes hovering look like the natural decision of weight. He is older than quarrels and clean as law. If he speaks, he does so in the grammar of motion, which Psyche translates without surprise. You have been sent to collect from a river that disallows collectors, he says, by banking once and letting the sun polish one long feather as if it were a sentence underlined. That is the river's dignity. And your dignity is not to test it with your body. Lend me the vessel that was handed to you by a mouth that likes to instruct more than to praise. She holds up the little vase, the way one extends a hand that must be trusted now or not at all. The eagle takes it between curved tools, so well made they do not need to threaten, and he goes where people are not invited, down through the silk hush, into the throat of stone, out beyond the wet curtain, where the black water keeps its decision. For a time, he is only a notion crosshatched upon spray. Then he is himself again, ascending with a steadiness that makes the air agree to carry him. When he returns the vessel, it is heavier by the exact weight of obedience, and the lip is rimmed with what looks, for an instant, like a coin of surface before it dissolves into being water as water thinks of itself. Psyche thanks him in the old way, by lowering her head, and in the newer way, by holding the gift correctly. The eagle writes a wide arc over the valley as if signing his work and slides back into the high blue where signatures live. She stands a moment longer, as one does after a stranger has been unexpectedly kind, and lets the moment finish itself so it will not cling. Then she turns, and the path receives her, and the olives resume their patient commentary, and the goat's thread of a trail accepts the single human bead and draws it where it was drawn before. She does not hurry to the temple. She does not dawdle. The water has its own schedule, and she keeps it. When the columns finally reassemble themselves into the familiar order that means home for now, Aphrodite is already there, as if goddesses know how to appear at the last step, because the last step is a kind of punctuation they refuse to miss. The handover is businesslike. The goddess weighs the small vase in her palm and does not spill, because the idea of spilling near her is frowned upon by reality. She tastes nothing, smells nothing, but her eyes suggest that she can see a proof in water the way mathematicians see proofs in chalk. She grants the third tick of approval with a word that has the temperature of metal kept in a shaded drawer. 2. Or perhaps she is counting from a different beginning. It hardly matters. What matters is that the next instruction arrives without the drama stories like to lend it. There remains, she says, a certain box to be collected from a certain queen below, a small favor arranged between women who understand that complexion is a public matter. Go to Persephone and receive from her a little portion of beauty laid up for my use. Sealed, of course. Bring it unopened. You will be tempted to improve yourself along the way. Do not mistake distribution for privilege. She gestures in the direction where shadows dilute into rocks, and then into memory. The doors are where doors always are. Do not waste anyone's time by being surprised. Psyche does not ask the goddess for a map because maps are answers given to the wrong questions. She bows and leaves the formal coolness of the shrine and walks until the stone accepts scrub, and the scrub becomes slope, and the slope tries out a few ledges for character. A tower that had no business being there decides it will be there anyway, the way towers do when they remember a detail in a story that must be spoken by stone. It is a ruin only by courtesy. Its stairs still know how to count, and its single window continues to believe in the sky. She sits on the lowest step and puts her hands on the treads the way one puts hands on the knees of an elder. The tower answers not with voice but with instruction, a sequence of courtesies as orderly as the meander. You will carry 2 coins, it tells her in the currency of knowing, for fares that must be paid without complaint. You will carry barley cakes soaked with honey for the keeper who minds 3 mouths and likes to pretend he is impossible. You will refuse gossip offered as requests for help, because in that country pity is a hole disguised as a favor and falling through it is easy. You will not sit where the dead sit. You will not eat what the dead eat. You will keep your eyes from wandering where the eyes of the living have no business drifting. You will walk as if you belonged because all travelers belong when they move with purpose enough to help the road remember itself. It is a lot for silence to say. Psyche listens as if the stone had been practicing this speech for a century and was grateful to finally be asked. She prepares in the language of small tasks, which is the language she has learned to speak with some fluency. 2 coins, clean, face up, wrapped in a fold of the himation where fingers can find them without fuss. 2 thick cakes, barley and honey and a pinch of salt, pressed by palm and heel as if flatness were another form of reverence, wrapped in linen that remembers the beehive by scent. A lamp, because hands that have learned a lesson do not abandon the tool that taught it, though she swears to keep the flames strangled beneath the cap unless life asks differently. She ties her sandals with the exact knot that has never betrayed her ankle. She says the goddess's name without decoration, not a plea, not a challenge, just accuracy. The air responds the way air responds when a person says correct things, by being the right temperature and letting itself be breathed without resistance. Late light carries her to the place where the earth has a seam. It is not a dramatic wound, not a cliff with teeth. It is a porch of rock that learned to be door, a tumble of laurel and cypress that learned to stand as if on guard without knowing for whom. A cold that is not cruel, only administrative. The first step down is an agreement, and the second is a renewal of the first, and the third is the sort of signature one makes when one is already signed and is simply confirming to oneself that the hand still knows its style. The air tastes of iron and restraint. The sound is the sound of many rooms, each reciting the letter H politely and never getting tired of being correct. Psyche walks with the posture of a person in a museum, which is to say she lets her eyes be wide without allowing them to misbehave. She passes little shrines set into the rock where people with urgent loves once set small things. A ring that belonged to a finger that needed to be convinced, a lock of hair folded into a scrap of cloth that knew too much, a toy boat still full of voyage because children are generous with belief. She does not touch. The world notices and approves. At the place where the path narrows enough to require single-file humility, a boat is tied to a ring that the rock grew on purpose. The ferryman is the kind of figure stone might carve if stone could grow tired. Spare, exact, eyes like receipts. He does not ask questions because he has learned that questions waste crossings. She offers a coin without speech. It is accepted with the smallest nod the economy allows. The boat complains very little. It allows the weight of a living body to be its lesson in balance. Water knocks once and then remembers itself. Oars learn the measured weight of air and then the measured weight of not air. The far side arrives like punctuation at the end of a line that did not need to be long to be proper. She steps out, and the mooring line teaches itself to be a question mark again. The three-mouthed keeper is not a problem. He is an audience of appetites who finds diplomacy more interesting than violence when the host brings the right plate. She breaks off one barley cake with the decorum shown to high officials and offers it in a way that treats the creature not as obstacle, but as colleague. The first mouth accepts, the second admires, the third reconsiders a bark and decides to be moved by flavor instead. They let her pass not because she is fierce, not tonight, not here, but because she has understood that some doors open to the grammar of courtesy the way others open to the grammar of keys. Deep halls repeat themselves like columns in a dream. Steady, pale, no aspiration beyond being adequate for the weight they hold. Torches line the walls and do their smoky arithmetic. Shadows, obedient to their geometry, behave. On one bench, a woman with a beautiful, tired face asks Psyche to help her lift a load that is not heavy and will therefore triple itself out of spite. On another, a man requests that she stop and tell him what hour it is in the world above, which is precisely the sort of question that turns the listener to stone if the listener wants too badly to be helpful. She keeps her eyes on the path's modest, sensible curve and repeats the sentence the tower taught her as a charm. Not today, not this work, not this way. She permits herself one glance down a side passage where a small figure is trying to roll a burden that does not roll. She blesses him with the kind of blessing that is neither offered nor withheld, simply allowed to exist by a passerby who refuses to make the world worse. She does not interfere. In a place where interference is the most seductive form of error, this is a species of excellence. When she reaches the quiet court where the queen keeps her audience, the temperature falls by a single polite degree, as if to acknowledge that someone has come who understands windows and how to open them without banging. Persephone is not fearsome. She is accurate. Her gaze is the exactness of harvest. What is ripe is gathered. What is unready is left to finish being itself. She listens to Psyche's request in a silence that is not refusal. She sets on a low table a small box, dark as polished walnut and bound with a band of dull gold that has decided to retire from being decorative. For Aphrodite, she says, and the words place themselves on the lid like seals that will never need wax. Unopened, she does not threaten, because queens who would be venerated do not need to threaten. She adds, with the courtesy of a hostess who refuses to feed a guest for her own good. Eat nothing here. The food is true in the wrong direction. Psyche bows with the deep economy she has been practicing since morning. She takes the box as one takes tempers from stern teachers, gratefully, because the instruction is clear, carefully, because the weight is real, and with the humility of someone who knows that a tool is not a toy. The journey back begins not with a trumpet, but with a step. The same benches appear, the same patients practicing the theater of request, the same custodian with polite jaws, the same clerk of crossings with his hand extended only when the work requires it. She pays the second coin the way the river paid its trust to the eagle, precisely, without conversation. The boat does equally well in reverse. Water remembers how to be surface for a hull and passage for a blade at the same time. The rock ring receives rope. Rope receives knot. Knot receives patience. Patience receives debt paid. The passage grows lighter, and that way caverns have where they invent dawns by simply reducing their commitment to being night. When she steps into air that plants know, Persephone's cool single degree of distance steps back into stone, and the world above resumes its low, kind argument with time. The slope that was a seam on the way down is only a slope now. The cypress breathes less strictly. The laurel regards her with the same green reserve it offers everyone, which is, in plant language, a shower of congratulations. She does not open the box. It is the simplest sentence of the day and will become the hardest by afternoon. For now, she keeps it as one keeps a sleeping infant who does not belong to you. Near, supported, unexamined. The tower does not speak, which is a compliment. The path finds the temple without requiring her to choose. Even the dust seems to prefer not to be dramatic. When the columns align into their practiced interval and the steps resume their thesis on ascent, Psyche steadies the box with both hands and rehearses, under her breath, the sentence Aphrodite will allow and will not allow, the one that names a task completed and asks, without trembling, what honest work remains. And because a day that has taught itself calm deserves a calm ending, the sky obliges. There is no storm tonight. The moon is on duty, but not in a hurry, and when lamps are needed, they will do the work the moon would do if the moon lived indoors. Psyche's breath evens. The meander in her mind. Turn, turn, advance. Turn, turn, advance. Arrives at the last corner and finds it wants to be a straight line for a while. The straight line is the walk across the forecourt to the place where the goddess will weigh the box with her eyes. The straight line is the patience that knows not to peep. The straight line is the knowledge that the last part of a task is the part that tries to shake the hand that carries it. She holds on. She is very tired, which is not the same as being weak. She is very quiet, which is not the same as being small. She stands at the threshold with her cargo shaped like a lesson, in the house of the goddess, who likes instructions to be obeyed as much as she likes mirrors to tell her the truth, draws one long breath for ceremony. The day has done what days can do. Night rolls out its cool grammar. The next thing will be said when it is time to say it. There is no storm today. The sky is clear and still, and lamplight, when evening remembers to ask for it, will do the work of the moon. Psyche leaves the temple steps with the small dark box pressed against her shawl, the way one carries an infant that is not one's own, close enough to promise care, far enough to remind the hands that they are servants. The path up from the shore is the same path as before, only slower, as if the dust had learned to read and now pauses over every letter. Cypress holds its vertical thought beside the way. Laurel gives shade carefully, like a banker issuing coins. Bees open and close the afternoon with their small brass hinges. The box has no interest in scenery. It is walnut dark, banded in dull gold that has retired from boasting, and it keeps its word perfectly, unopened. Aphrodite's instruction is simple and exact. Deliver what Persephone sealed. A simple order can be the largest thing a day has to lift. The mind, being a good talker, offers companionship. It tells her she looks dusty, which is true. It tells her that the goddess of mirrors is a stern judge, which is truer still. It reminds her that love, when it returns, will see a face. It wonders whether a face might earn a gentler hearing if it wore the faintest kindness from the queen below. Psyche listens the way a careful cook listens to a simmering pot, not with fear, only with respect for what heat can do when unsupervised. She walks. A low wall of sun-warmed stone trades its stored noon into her palms when she rests there. The olives practice silver, and then green, and then silver again as the air moves through. A shepherd on a far slope lifts 2 fingers without breaking the thread of his mending. The world approves of continuing. Dust collects in the fold of her hem. The strap of the small amphora at her side prints its argument on her shoulder. The box is not heavy. That is its trick. If it weighed like fate, she would fear it. Because it weighs like a keepsake, she entertains it. She tells herself a true thing. Aphrodite asked for speed and obedience. And an almost true thing. Persephone would not grudge me a breath of what she stores by the measure. Almost true things are the most persuasive. They wear the clothes of their betters and borrow their manners. At a bend where the path and a low platform of rock agree to rest together, Psyche sits. She does not intend to linger. She intends to count 3 breaths and rise on the 4th. 1 breath becomes 5 because the breeze is competent. The 5th becomes 10 because the box is quiet and seems, if anything, to wish her well. She studies the lid. It has been sealed by a queen who understands that seals fail if they flatter themselves. No ribbon to untie, no wax to warm and restamp. Only a fit so honest that fingers think they are the ones deciding to desist. Psyche rests her thumbs on the gold band without pressure, in the way a harpist settles her hands before sound. She tells the box a polite lie, only to be sure everything is safe in there, and the box, being wood and metal and instruction, declines to reply. Heat bothers the shoulder under the strap. The afternoon produces a small gravity that attaches itself to eyelids and good intentions. She thinks, as many before her have thought in moments like this, that improvement and disobedience are cousins who pretend not to recognize each other in public but share a cupboard at home. And then she does the thing a person does when the mind has written a permission slip and left it signed on the table. She lifts. What comes out is not perfume and not light. It is sleep, pure, concentrated, and impartial, the kind kept in the storerooms of the deep, where even gods send their rest to be mended. It does not leap. It rises with the courtesy of cool vapor from a bowl, a tender evening made visible, the essence of poppy without the flower, a moth's idea of a blanket. It folds itself over her face with professional skill. She tries to step back and discovers that stepping is a daytime verb. Knees consult with stone and agree to sit. The box, relieved of its first duty, swings lightly in her hand like a door that has finished being closed and wonders whether it might try opening again later. The world takes 2 polite steps away, so she will not be embarrassed. Psyche sleeps the way a field sleeps after harvest, not as escape, not as punishment, but as heavy agreement. Hands slacken, the lid tilts. The afternoon, tolerant, continues to exist without her management. There is a particular wind that knows where lovers fall. It does not speak. Wind is poor at grammar, but it draws a map for wings. Eros is healed enough to travel. The burn the lamp gave him has cooled from lesson into mark. He has been elsewhere, teaching himself how to be patient in a house with no doors, and then teaching himself how to leave quietly through a window that was not there yesterday and will not be there tomorrow. He arrives not as thunder and not as proof, but as the correction a sentence makes when it realizes a comma would have served better than a period. He finds her with the immediacy of someone who never truly lost the way. He does not waste any of the seconds that grief would like to rent at a high price. With 2 fingers he lifts the lid, and with the same unhurried authority with which one gathers spilt flour, he coaxes the sleep back into the box. Sleep is professional. It returns to work. It does not apologize. Sleep never apologizes, but it complies with a competence that would be admirable if it did not make the heart ache. He looks at Psyche as a man looks at the proof that the world can still break him and that he intends, nevertheless, to go on living in it. He does not scold. He has learned, recently and thoroughly, what fear will do when asked to make an argument. He says her name the way a hand steadies a cup before lifting it. He tells the box the truth. This is not yours for her, and clicks the lid shut with a sound so small it could be mistaken for the end of a sigh. Some say he touched her with the feathered edge of a wing. Some say the point of an arrow kissed her wrist. Some say he simply stood near and allowed his presence to remind her body what waking is. However the story prefers to say it, Psyche breathes a new breath that has her in it. The world steps forward again and offers her its arm. There is a moment when awakening wants to be embarrassed by the pose it finds you in. Eros prevents the moment from making a speech. He lifts her gently, not from the ground only, but from the argument she opened with herself. "Carry it," he says, nodding at the box, as if it were a word you refuse to mispronounce. "Deliver it to my mother. Let the task be as simple as it is." He smiles a small smile that understands the comedy in asking a human to keep something simple. "I will mend what can be mended that does not belong to either of us." He does not tell her where he is going. He does not need to. He is going where petitions are heard when petitioners are gods, to the place above even Aphrodite's pride, to the seat that drinks the light of morning as if it had invented it, to make a case for a wedding that could quiet the quarrel his mother once began. He tilts the box in her direction again, as if to let her feel its new obedience, and he does not kiss her, because kisses are arguments in the language of skin, and the hour needs fewer arguments and more accuracy. The air records the way his shadow lifts. The laurel proves it by turning one leaf and no more. The bees remain brief and professional. When he rises, it is not a spectacle. It is simply the correct use of wings by someone who has earned them. She watches him until the sky refuses to help her count further, and then remembers that watching is not today's assignment. She reties her sandal, resets the fold of her himation, and takes the path as if paths were promises and she intends to be believed. The slope is kinder on the return, the way slopes often are when they see that a person has decided not to make demands. Dust surrenders. Pebbles roll out from underfoot without sulking. The sun trades fierceness for light. She thinks of nothing complicated. Thinking, when it is useful, becomes a litany of small correctnesses. Box closed. Hands clean. Step, step. Water later. Breath now. She passes the ruin that taught her the rules and touches, with 2 fingers, the stone beside its door. Not because stone is sentimental, but because thanks is a habit that improves the hand that offers it. A shepherd greets her with a nod heavy enough to be considered a benediction. A dog pretends not to see her and wags anyway. Ants along the path explain, in their busy grammar, that sorting was always a kind of prayer if you look at it rightly. When the columns of the goddess appear, perfect, identical, satisfied with the geometry they have kept since men were smaller, Psyche does not hesitate at the foot of the steps. Hesitation is a luxury of people who are still deciding whether a thing is theirs to do. She climbs. The forecourt is cool, having practiced shade all day. Inside, Aphrodite is the temperature of certainty, and the floor has found a way to be both polished and forgiving. Psyche does not compose a speech. She places the box on the low table that has been taught all its life to receive offerings without trembling. As asked, she says, and the words are the right size. Neither apology nor boast, neither plea nor defense, only the sentence the task deserved. The goddess regards the box in the way a jeweler looks at a setting she designed, neither surprised nor hurried, assessing not the stone but the work around it. Perhaps she smells, faintly, the iron cool of the lower air. Perhaps she hears, deep in the wood, a memory of Persephone's voice. Perhaps she simply sees that the seal has not been violated and draws the proper conclusion. Approval, in her house, is not delivered in praise. It arrives as the absence of a new command for a heartbeat longer than expected. Then the heartbeat finishes and the next command enters, because a day's education has not relieved her of her preference for assigning. There will be no more errands today, she says, as if granting an empire. Rest where you will. Order yourself. Tomorrow I will decide if I am still entertained by your correction. Psyche bends her head, not low, not theatrically, just enough to let the neck confess relief. When she steps back from the table, the room grows larger in exactly the way rooms do when they have been spared trouble. She is shown to a little court where water speaks to stone and stone pretends not to be flattered. Bread appears beside olives and a strip of cheese that tastes like a hill under wind. A linen cloth cool from the cistern says the only sentence cloth is designed to say, "You have done enough for this hour. Let me carry the rest." She eats without ceremony and without haste. She does not think about the box. She does not think about wings. She thinks, instead, about the mathematics of sleep done properly, how it should arrive, where it should take its chair, what posture the body should offer it so that, when morning comes, morning finds the bed in order and the mind willing to learn again. Dusk constructs itself in the forecourt like a stage hand who knows where everything goes and enjoys being unseen. Lamps are lit by hands invisible and expert. The goddess, somewhere in the complex of rooms, resumes her favorite practice, being looked at by mirrors, while telling herself the story that makes her actions always necessary. Psyche lies down where she is permitted and lets the body surrender governance without surrendering dignity. The day's miles unknot themselves in her calves. The wrists memorize the curve of the little handle they must not lift again. The breath files the paperwork that keeps the chest in business. If a dream comes, it is a landscape with a straight road and a door at the end, and the door opens because she is walking, and walking is a key. If a prayer comes, it is not made of words. It is made of the willingness to wake when called and to behave when no one is watching. The night, professional as always, accepts the assignment. And somewhere higher than the columns, higher than the mountain, higher than the jealousies that make excellent entertainment and poor homes, the young god is already negotiating in rooms where decisions wear crowns. He is polite because he has learned politeness in a house that punished him without teaching him. He is firm because love asked him to become firm and he agreed. He is, for the first time, not only arrow and impulse, but intention. Morning will bring its arithmetic. What must end? What may continue? Which vows get promoted to laws? For now, there is no storm. The sky is clear and still. The lamp that was nearly misused returns to its quiet work. Psyche sleeps like a person who has learned, for one more day, how to carry something without opening it. There is no storm today. The sky is clear and still, and when evening comes, lamplight will do the work of the moon. Morning, meanwhile, lays a pale wash across the slopes and the sea, like a careful oil painting choosing its first, gentlest color. Psyche wakes in the temple court where water keeps its steady conversation with stone, and the world receives her as it has learned to do, without surprise, without demand. Somewhere beyond the mountains, beyond even the high pastures where shepherds trade whistles with their dogs, a road climbs into a different sort of weather, the bright air that collects above the range like a second country. Eros has taken that road already, not as an arrow flies, quick and vanishing, but as an intention travels, steadily, with the kind of patience love acquires after it has met difficulty and decided not to retire. If you listen for wings, you will not hear them. You will hear, perhaps, the way the day remembers how to hold its breath when it is about to be asked to witness a promise. The bright house above, which men name Olympus when they need a word, is not made of thunder this morning. It is made of order. Columns do what columns do. Courts remember how voices echo. A breeze like the zephyr's older cousin walks the porticos and corrects the hems of robes that do not require correction. If you were allowed to stand just inside the threshold, you would be disappointed by how peaceful everything is. No argument tears the sky. No jeweled spectacle demands applause. Hera measures the length of a shadow and permits herself a private satisfaction that the day is behaving. Athena carries a scroll tucked neatly under an elbow, the way wisdom chooses to be useful, not decorative. Apollo tunes the thought of a lyre rather than the instrument, which is faster and requires fewer hands. Hermes has finished 3 errands that no one noticed and is considering a 4th. Aphrodite, who is beauty even when bored, inspects her reflection in a basin and tells it a story in which she is always right. The basin, being water, prefers agreement. Into this courteous machinery comes Eros, no longer only the suddenness that painters like to paint, but a young god with his wings folded like calm behind him and a case to make that will withstand being heard by ears that have long practice in refusing. He does not burst, he arrives. He bows with the economy of someone who has discovered that gesture is more persuasive when it is not expensive. His burn, the small, honest mark where Psyche's lamp taught him caution, has cooled into memory. He speaks first to the one the house obeys most easily, Zeus, whose authority this morning looks like an old laurel that refuses to be impressed by storms because it has outlived so many. "Father," says Eros, using the word not as claim but as form, "I have erred where love is impatient and learned where love is patient." A mortal has been steady enough to be taught by her own mistakes and gentle enough to wear correction. Allow me to put the matter beyond quarrel. Give me Psyche with a law that even storytellers must respect. Teach my mother that victory and surrender can share a room without shouting. He does not mention Eros or conquest or the myths that enjoyed making him small. He speaks as a craftsman might speak of the correct tool for the correct task. He asks not for spectacle, but for settlement. Zeus is a weather reader of people. He takes the temperature of a desire before it declares itself fever. He has seen young gods plead for prizes and forget that prizes have to become household afterward, fed, watered, dusted, kept from frightening the neighbors. He has seen old gods refuse everything until the day they agree to something too large. He looks at Eros and does not see a boy with clever wings and a mischievous quiver. He sees, for once, a man. The calm kind, the kind a city trusts with keys. He lifts a hand, and the hand is both permission and command. "Messenger," he says without turning, and Hermes is present in the space the syllable leaves behind. "Fetch the mortal, not with a flourish, with a handrail. Guide her up the long stair by the gentlest path. Remind the winds that no gust is required today. Escort her as if escorting a promise we intend to keep." The order is already half completed because Hermes likes to win races no one else knows have begun. He bows to the air out of habit and to the king out of accuracy, and by the time his sandals leave the polished floor, the road below has simplified itself to help. You could say Psyche sees nothing of the ascent, and you would be telling the truth kindly. She sees rock, then light, then cloud that behaves like polished marble, then a short bright hallway in which footsteps sound smaller than her own. Hermes does not hurry her. He edits the slope with those small inventions good guides know. An extra step where a stride might falter, a tiny pause disguised as a view. "Breathe," he says once, as if he has invented the idea but is not claiming credit. When the last stair turns to level and shadow becomes manageable again, he gestures without ceremony and lets her walk the final paces by herself, for dignity. It is a custom in high places not to arrive carried. A gathering has been pretending not to be a gathering. When Psyche steps beneath the eaves, the pretense ends, not with trumpet, but with a silence that agrees to be shared. Aphrodite turns first, because pride moves faster than love and arrives at the eyes before the heart can veto. She sees a mortal who has crossed the proper threshold and has not betrayed a lamp the second time it asked for obedience. She sees, too, the narrow box set upon a table at a sensible distance, sealed as it was given. Her mouth calculates 3 possible contradictions and cancels all of them because mathematics is not on her side this morning. "You make trouble neatly," she says at last, and the compliment is concealed only insofar as it cannot bear to be noticed. Zeus, who has listened to envy long enough to file it under weather, lifts again the hand that moves stories forward. "Enough errands," he says, and the word enough becomes a beam that roofs the room. The boy's house is in need of a roof that will not leak. The girl's courage is in need of a name that will outlast the news. If we mean to be gods rather than administrators of accidents, we shall make what has happened honest. A cup appears, not because cups are conjured here, but because service is quick. In it is ambrosia, which is not merely a drink, but a grammar that teaches the body how to continue without wearing out. A clear sweetness that remembers gardens no one plants and mornings no one has to light. The cup is not offered as a bribe. Bribes are noisy. It is offered as a tool to make a marriage equal on paper and in practice. Take, says Zeus, not grandly, simply as a man who has portioned out a meal for many years and knows to pass the bread into the correct hands. Become compatible with what you already love. Psyche lifts the cup the way she lifted the box when it was dangerous, carefully, accurately, in the full knowledge that small vessels have great ambitions. The liquid scent is a very faint honey, a very faint laurel, a very faint salt from a sea no one has found. It does not dazzle. It does what water does when a thirsty person drinks. It changes the world by making breath easier. There is no lightning inside the swallow, no chorus that believes itself necessary. There is only the precise operation by which a life that would have ended becomes a life that does not have to, unless it chooses. She feels what any body feels at a good meal taken on a tiring day, a distributing warmth, a sense that corners which had been sharp have decided to be round, a very human urge to say thank you and to mean it. With that done, the house does what houses do when a wedding is about to be a wedding. It begins to lay a table. Hestia nods once, and fires behave. Hephaestus glances up from a piece of work and arranges heat where heat is needed and not where it is not. Apollo permits music to exist by tuning silence and then laying a string across it. The Graces walk through the room like explanations for why walking was invented. The Muses consult among themselves and decide that the story will be best remembered if told quietly. Aphrodite does not smile. She has her reputation, but she lowers the angle of her judgment by exactly the amount that allows generosity to pass without having to bow. She brings, who else should carry it, the small veil that turns a promise into a ceremony and lets it rest over Psyche's hair like the thought of a cloud. Eros stands not as the arrow-bearer, but as the man he worked to be. The mark on his shoulder has become an ornament telling a lesson no one needs to repeat. Vows in the bright house are brief. The language is old and efficient. I will and I will, and a word that means together spoken so simply that it feels like a tool you can use daily without wearing it out. Hera witnesses with an accountant's satisfaction that the numbers add and a gardener's knowledge that growth will take its own long time. Athena approves the syllables as a structure sound enough to hold seasons. The cup of nectar makes its quiet rounds. Bread that never becomes stale is broken into pieces that refuse to become crumbs. A breeze that smelled of olive at the foot of the mountain smells of bay up here and moves the veil a little, not to display, only to prove it is real. The banquet is not a spectacle of glitter. It is a demonstration of ease. Platters arrive already balanced. Salt knows where to sit. Figs look like the small suns they always were. Cheese remembers hills. Honey remembers bees. Conversation chooses small subjects on purpose. How a column must be carved if it wants to bear weight without making a fuss. Which path a swallow will prefer when the wind parries. Why ambrosia should never be described by anyone who hasn't earned it. Eros looks at Psyche as if today were ordinary on purpose. The kind of ordinary that keeps marriages safe. And Psyche looks at Eros as if she has discovered the safest place to set down words when they are finished being spoken. Zeus does not make a speech. He has said enough for one season. He lifts his cup a modest height and replaces it. If stories required fireworks, they would be poor teachers of rest. What they give, when they are good, is a porch to sit on while the night arranges itself. The bright house dimly brightens. Yes, that is what it feels like, a mild glow that refuses to be harsh. Stars pause at the threshold to see whether they are invited to stay longer. They are. The air cools into the comfortable shape it keeps for evenings that have done their work. Aphrodite, having tested all possible objections until they bored even her, lets them go like ribbons after a festival and accepts the fact that a new daughter-in-law can be an asset if she understands courtesy as well as courage. She says nothing. The silence performs the blessing. Later, how much later the hour declines to record. There is the sort of stillness that houses consider their reward for having behaved. In one small room that looks east, a pair of sandals rest toe-to-toe in a vandalism of tidiness. A lamp on a low table is set to the exact flame a long marriage prefers, small enough to forgive, bright enough to find a dropped pin or a wandering thought. Wings learn, without complaint, how to fold in a manner respectful of linen. Two voices discover that the words we promised become more beautiful when you stop pronouncing them and start doing them. The world below does not thunder with the news. It clicks softly into a better alignment. The ants, who have always understood responsibility, continue their treaties with crumbs. The reeds along the brook keep their doctrine of waiting and teach it to every breeze that passes. The eagle allows himself one clean circle over a cliff that has learned manners. The tower at the seam between worlds decides to lean 1 degree less, out of pride. In a quiet field, a pomegranate completes a mathematics it had begun in spring, and no one interrupts to ask it to explain. On mornings thereafter, a young laughter will learn the house and be given a name that means pleasure. Hedon to those who like Greek in their mouths, and the rooms will make room gladly. If you wanted drama, you could tell the tale differently, but drama is a spice, and this is a meal designed for sleep. Sufficient for us tonight is the knowledge that the door between mortal and immortal has been fitted with a hinge rather than a lock, that law has agreed to respect what love chose, that the gods, when they are at their best, become custodians of gentleness instead of critics of mistakes. Down the mountain a lamp will be lit, and then another, and then another, and in a city that once listened to a lantern, a story will be told more quietly than it has ever been told. There is no storm tonight. The sky is clear and still. If you close your eyes, Olympus can be a pillow. If you keep them open, it can be a window. In either case, the house where vows were made will keep its watch, and when sleep arrives, and it should, now, it will find everything in order. There is no storm tonight. The sky is clear and still, and when evening settles, lamplight will do the work of the moon. Daylight, meanwhile, reintroduces the world to itself with the patience of a good painter, broad, calm strokes across the ridge, a softer wash along the olive groves, a little gold kept in reserve for door lintels and the rims of amphory. From the bright house above, where vows became law and law remembered to be kind, Eros and Psyche descend not as thunder and astonishment, but as a certainty two people can carry without dropping, a marriage that intends to last. Hermes, being Hermes, edits the path again. Steps appear exactly where ankles would have asked. Breeze and slope learn their manners. By the time the lower air receives them, the city has already practiced keeping its voice low, the way a stoa practices shade. If you were watching from the portico where the laurel throws its tidy ovals on stone, you would say nothing happened, and you would be right in the most important way. The house that once opened by itself has not forgotten how. Columns keep their posts. The door listens first, and then lifts its latch with the old, modest click. The floor remembers the measure of 2 sets of footsteps instead of 1. The fountain resumes its syllable and does not apologize for having continued when no one asked it to. Mosaic dolphins chase the idea of chasing, happily incompetent forever. Lamps find the places they prefer. A chair glides a hand's breadth to become the exact distance from the table that makes conversation feel invited rather than interrogated. Linen, folded by invisible hands with cheerful precision, waits where rest will look for it. You notice this. The air, which used to show its apprenticeship to Zephyr, now wears a quiet earned by vows. It is not a different house. It is the same house with better posture. Aphrodite visits the threshold the way moonlight visits a wall. No announcement, but nobody mistakes who has arrived. Beauty, when it respects itself, knows how to keep discipline. She inspects the room the way a craftswoman inspects a tool, not for ornament, for usefulness. The lamp is trimmed to an honest flame. The crater sits centered. The laurel sprig is fresh, not ostentatious. She does not embrace, because her affections like to be paid in the coin of correctness, but she concedes what the facts require. Her son stands with his wings folded like good manners. The girl, now not only mortal, meets her gaze without taking more light than a person should. Keep the box closed, the goddess says, meaning all future boxes, all temptations to hurry, all little lids the world loves to lift. Keep the floor swept. It is a benediction in her dialect. The room, relieved that praise will never be demanded of it, becomes even better at being clean. Word of their return travels the human way, along market conversations, across a baker's board, in the glances of neighbors who pretend to look at figs. The sisters come at last, no bracelets clinking now, only the practiced handclasp of people who have decided they would like to be useful. They do not bring advice. They bring the graces of ordinary visiting. Bread still warm inside the cloth, 3 new spindles, gossip declawed by kindness. Psyche welcomes them with the memory of old missteps folded carefully and put away so it will not be tripped over. They see a room that did not punish their sister for surviving. They see a man whose presence treats the hearth like a colleague, not a rival. Where other versions of the story would sharpen consequences until they cut, this house has chosen a gentler arithmetic. The sisters leave a little humbler and a little happier, which is a kind of miracle that does not make headlines and therefore matters more. Days stack like careful plates. Eros keeps a bow near the door not for drama, for tidiness. Some tools simply belong where you can find them. When he goes out to do the work of mending affections and persuading rough tempers to become neighborly, he leaves a feather on the table, not as a flourish, as a receipt. Psyche learns the choreography of a rhythm that includes both air and earth. She shops with a small basket and a large attention. She pays in coin and in the currency of compliments meant, not performed. In the garden, bees license themselves to be important and are. Olives begin deciding their autumn. The little lemon tree in a pot thinks about attempting fruit and is not mocked for the attempt. Indoors, she chooses what the day will teach. The scroll that wants to be read with the window open, the needle that wants to be threaded in a room that holds its breath, the spindle that enjoys being set spinning by the smallest possible push. Evenings organize themselves the way good evenings do, without spectacle. Lamps are lit to the size that forgives. Water and wine agree to the ratios that make strangers into guests. He returns by not startling anything. The air first, then the room, then the heart that knows what to do when it is not hurried. They speak about things that love does not waste. What the wind decided at the ridge, whether the swallows are ahead of schedule this year, how the city's baker has learned a new crust that tastes like memory. Sometimes they say nothing at all and let the spoon's small ring on clay declare the hour. On the nights when a story will not sit still, he tells the one about the eagle and the black river and makes sure the moral is patience, not power. On the nights when silence has opinions, they vote by leaning on the same pillow and letting breath do the counting. You will have heard that they were given a child, and it is true in the gentlest way truth can be true. There is a morning when the house discovers another note in its music. It is not loud. It is the little upward sound a laugh makes before it learns words, a brightness shaped like a syllable that any language would be proud to host. The old poets named her hedon, pleasure, because the world needed a reminder that delight can be lawful and quiet, not a riot but a practice. She is not a spectacle. She is a domestic miracle. The fountain edits its cadence to include her. The lamp learns to lower itself sooner. The floor becomes a map of new journeys 8 paces long with destinations that change hourly and must be announced every time as if invented. Ants visiting from the threshold pause, approve of the attention to crumbs, and continue their treaties with the baseboard. Seasons acquire a personality. In spring, the laurel, which has seen every vow in the neighborhood, decides it will produce enough leaves to bless 3 weddings and a birth. In summer, the portico becomes a school for shade and conversation, where neighbors sit and trade recipes for sleep as if sleep were a stew. In autumn, jars are filled and labeled with a penmanship that proves patience can be handwriting. In winter, the stoa turns inward and the hearth speaks a language even birds can understand. Crack, settle, hush. Eros learns the human calendar the way a wing learns the habit of folding. He discovers that errands are more persuasive when you come home with oranges. Psyche becomes a clerk of contentment and keeps her ledgers in gestures instead of ink. Here a door held. There a lamp pinched out at the correct moment. Here a child steps steadied without speeches. When they quarrel, as even careful people must, now and then, their arguments are built with soft blocks, precise, stackable, easy to put away before night. They do not throw, they arrange, and afterward the room contains a new piece of furniture called understanding, which nobody bought and everybody uses. Once, on an afternoon when the air had the color of a cooled loaf and the street could hear everything without repeating it, Psyche walks the long, familiar loop, from the laurel by the door to the little shrine with its terracotta-winged boy, to the bench that remembers her first careful sitting. She feels the old ache of a person who wants to think more than she knows how to. The tower at the seam between worlds, far off, tilts 1 degree toward her and then back, which in the language of towers means, we noticed. The cliff where the river scolds buckets lets a moth cross untroubled for her sake. Somewhere a reed composes a brief, satisfied sentence about waiting and sends it downstream. She smiles at the ridiculousness of imagining gratitude traveling by courier through stone and water, and keeps smiling because ridiculous gratitude is often the truest kind. Visitors come. Some are mortal and bring stories wrapped in cloth. A son returned from harbor duty with a song about ropes. A widow who has learned a recipe for sleeping without tears and would like to share it. Some are the gods' sort of guest, quick shadows at the lintel, a draft that smells like laurel and iron, a coin found under a bowl that nobody remembers setting there. Aphrodite arrives occasionally with the exact expression a mother-in-law wears when she is privately pleased and publicly uninterested in admitting it. She inspects Hedon's hands for evidence of mischief and finds only proof of dexterity. She adjusts a lamp by a finger's width and is satisfied that she has improved the world. She leaves with mirrors in a better mood. Hermes drops a rumor at the door like a stray cat. Athena returns a borrowed phrase. Hestia checks the hearth by simply existing, and the fire, flattered, behaves. At the edge of the city, the path that once carried Psyche away and back learns a new assignment. It becomes the route along which sleep walks to neighboring houses. People begin to rest earlier, not because they are commanded, but because the evening has picked up a habit of being convincing. Children who used to bargain with bedtime learn to negotiate for stories told more slowly. Dogs dream in the threshold and wag at nothing louder than the hour. Markets close on time. Loaves sell out nearer to sunset than to dark. The olive press hums for company, not urgency. Some nights, if you step into the street and turn in place, you will discover that the city has learned to be quiet in the way a choir learns to inhale together. You do not rehearse it. You simply decide to do it and then remember how. And when the day is done, not dramatically done, just satisfyingly complete, and the lamp on the low table is the last working thing besides breath, the pair in the house that kept its promises practiced the small sacrament they invented together. One line about the day's easiest moment. One line about the day's least easy moment. One line about tomorrow that names no dread. It is not a spell, but it behaves like one, because simple accuracy often does. Hedon falls asleep where the story said she would, plus or minus a basket. The fountain's syllable smudges into hush. The meander border around the room finishes its lap and takes a dignified bow. If the moon looks in, it is to confirm her competence. If the stars pause, it is to applaud not brilliance but steadiness. There is no storm tonight. The sky is clear and still. In the bright house above, Law yawns and is content. In the quiet house below, Love sets tomorrow's cups upside down so they will be dry by breakfast. The door knows which sound is his and which is hers and which belongs to small feet that will learn the map of tile and darkness. If you must stay awake a little longer, the story will stay with you and do the listening. If you drift, it will fold itself like linen and wait on the chair. Either way, the new weather holds. The house breathes. The city remembers. And Theode, after so many familiar corners, offers one more. Beyond it, a quiet courtyard waits. A visit is arranged, not downward by ladder, but sideways by kindness. Hermes, who understands errands too tenderly to call them errands, sweeps a small path through the afternoon and leaves it where Psyche's parents will find it if they are willing to go walking. They arrive without spectacle, shade doing the hosting, water poured, a table that knows exactly how many cups are needed. Psyche meets them not as a miracle, but as their child carrying quiet, and the quiet is enough. There is no storm today. The sky is clear and still, and when evening returns, the lamps will do the work of the moon. After the wedding glories have been folded and put away, the bright house settles into the long grammar of living. Subject, verb, object, morning, task, rest. Psyche learns that immortality does not remove the need to be on time for simple things. The lamp still prefers to be trimmed before dusk. Bread still asks for patience at the edge of the oven. A child still chooses 1 hour for laughter, 1 for tears, and none of those hours can be persuaded to trade places. Eros comes and goes like a reliable tide, bringing stories that are small on purpose. A fisherman who untangled his net without swearing. A neighbor who lifted a bucket for another and found that his back did not complain. A pair of quarreling cousins who discovered that memory often magnifies insult and shrinks kindness, and chose, this once, to reverse the magnification. These reports are not news in the way heralds like, but they are news in the way sleep likes. Ordinary things that decide to be a little better than yesterday. Give. Sometimes Psyche stands on the outer portico and looks down where the mountain loosens into human weather. The city that once listened to a lantern is still there, earnest in its chores. From such a height, roofs look like the backs of sleeping animals, and streets look like water that has learned to travel without a riverbed. She thinks of her father's careful hands, of the quiet arithmetic her mother kept over food and comfort, of sisters who once brought worry wrapped as advice and now, by some grace that requires no signature, send honest messages through market voices and afternoon gossip. She is well. She is not a ghost. She is busy with work that does not satisfy applause, but satisfies the day. The rumors that used to bruise her name have lost their appetite. A rumor, like a fire, dies when no one feeds it. In its place, small habits have spread the way time spreads in the cracks of warm stone. A woman sets a cup of water at her door for passers-by, and sets a second one because it made her happy to set the first. A mason levels a step that had been treacherous for years and does not charge extra for the new straightness. A teacher pauses before scolding and asks a softer question instead. These are not miracles. They are furniture moved an inch, and somehow the whole room sits right afterward. Hedon grows as children grow when houses pay attention. She specializes in the kind of pleasure that leaves the room tidier than it found it. The sigh a chair makes when a tired person sits, the sound the first slice of bread gives when it accepts the knife cleanly, the shine a swept floor gives back to a beam of afternoon sun. When she laughs, it is the laugh of water learning stone by heart. When she cries, it is brief, and afterward everyone in the room is better at kindness. She reaches for Psyche's necklace and for the feather at Eros's shoulder and for the lamp's handle, which is removed, gently, because hands must be taught that not everything wants to be touched. The gods who visit, some often, some rarely, learn to moderate themselves near the cradle. Hera keeps her blessings measured, because an excess of blessing can behave like weather. Athena shortens her speeches. Apollo tunes the thought of music and lets silence perform. Aphrodite pretends not to look often, but the mirrors catch her looking, and the mirrors are old professionals at noticing what cannot be said without consequences. She discovers, with a surprise that does not displease her, that stewardship suits her as much as triumph did. Beauty, correctly supervised, becomes a town ordinance instead of a parade. In the lower country, seasons keep to their familiar bargains. The olive trees lift silver when they are pleased and dark when they are thirsty. The reeds along the quiet brook continue their doctrine of waiting and teach it to wind that would otherwise spend itself. Ants practice the empire of attention, carrying seeds half again their weight with the good-natured pride of experts who like their work. An eagle writes a single clean circle over a cliff he once visited on someone else's behalf and then returns to his own business, which is to inspect distances for their integrity. A ruined tower at the seam between worlds leans 1 degree less because it approves of what has been arranged above. It will not say so, being stone, but its shadow measures the change every afternoon. In the streets of Psyche's city, a lamp seller, no longer young, not yet finished, polishes a row of oil lamps and tells customers, without knowing why, that a trimmed wick is a kind of prayer. Sometimes there are visits, and sometimes there are dreams instead of visits, because dreams know how to carry a person without the embarrassment of being seen. When Psyche's parents sleep near the window on warm nights, the air remembers her and arranges the moon so that it does not intrude. They dream a courtyard with a fountain that pronounces now in a voice that cures impatience. They dream bread that cools without complaint. They dream a child's hand deciding that a thumb will do. In the morning, they remember almost none of it, but they wake with the particular composure that comes from having been loved politely. The sisters meet at market and tell the story again, this time removing the thunder and adding the useful detail about the lamp. They do not speak the goddess's name. They say only that trust has a calendar, and if you keep it, doors behave. It is enough. Eros, who used to be the kind of god painters prefer, always arriving in the instant, always catching someone by surprise, now prefers to be the kind husbands should be, on time, steady, and more interesting in the second hour than in the first. He learns the art of making a day easier for other people without being thanked. He fixes a latch in a shepherd's gate by reminding the shepherd how latches work. He interrupts a quarrel by lending each side a different memory that makes anger look foolish. He persuades sleep to visit a house that had forgotten how to invite it. When he returns to the bright house, he does not bring trophies, because trophies make dust. He brings little stories and leaves them on the table like fruit, to be eaten when the talk is hungry. Psyche offers news of her own, news from the garden, which has learned to position its shadows for the benefit of the cook, news from the library, where a scroll about justice has decided to become more generous, news from the nursery, where the business of growing has taught the day a new cadence. Between these two kinds of news, his from the world and hers from the rooms, the house decides, night after night, to be a place where the heart can lie down without remembering where all its armor is stored. If there are worshippers below who light a candle in Psyche's name, she does not require it. If there are stories told about her that get the details wrong, she does not correct them. Accuracy matters for tasks and tools. For fables, it is enough that the lesson arrives with its shoes tied. And the lesson, told quietly like a secret no one needs to keep, is simple: that love survives correction if it is willing to be corrected. That patience is not the absence of desire but the harness for it. That work, done without drama, changes the air. A girl in the city hears the tale from her aunt while they fold laundry, and the aunt, who is wise in ways she does not advertise, talks less about gods and more about lamps. Trim the wick, she says. Don't stare into the flame to see if it loves you. Let it do the job it was made for. Don't open boxes that are not yours to open. And if you do, close them again and carry on. The girl nods the way girls do when they pretend not to be persuaded and are. There are festivals as well, because even quiet cities need to practice joy. The first one after the wedding is small, almost private. It begins with sweeping, which is the most honest way to begin celebration. It continues with bread, olives, and the kind of cheese that tastes like a hill under wind. The lyres do not compete. People sing in the key of ordinary. Children are allowed to fall asleep on benches, and grown men are allowed to carry them home without the pretense of gruffness. Someone raises a cup and says nothing memorable, and that is exactly the point. The gods do not attend in costume. They attend as weather. A breeze arranges hems. A star arrives early and watches from a reasonable distance. If Aphrodite looks down, she allows herself to be pleased that beauty can exist without rehearsal. If Hera looks down, she counts and is satisfied. If Zeus looks down, he remembers that roofs are what make houses faithful. The night ends when it ought to. neither too early nor too late. And in the morning, the square remembers how to be a market again without sulking. On a different morning in the bright house, Psyche finds a box on a table that is exactly like the box Persephone gave her and not at all like it. This one is empty and meant to be used. A note beside it, Aphrodite's hand, unmistakable, says only, "Store in this whatever you want to save from your days." Not the grand things, those save themselves. Save the small proofs, threads trimmed, names remembered, mistakes corrected before they grew teeth. Psyche understands. She puts into it a single dull pin that used to catch her sleeve and now catches nothing because the sleeve has been taut. A smooth pebble Hedone insists is important because it is smooth. A stub of wick that burned bravely and retired without complaint. A laurel leaf that perfumed stew more than it had any right to. When Eros sees the box, he smiles the way a man smiles when he recognizes that a new custom has been invented beneath his roof and will make his days easier to understand. If there is a hard hour still to come, it will not be dramatic. Difficulty in good houses arrives as a misplaced footstool, as a letter that needed answering yesterday, as a child's fever that chooses the one night no one had planned for wakefulness. The bright house has rehearsed calm too long to forget it now. On those nights, lamps burn lower and closer, voices shorten, help appears without procession. The lesson of the old tasks, of ants over seeds, of reeds over rivers, of eagles over depths, lives in the walls like a recipe. Do not fight the work. Ask for its proper tool. Do not argue with the hour. Ask what the hour can honestly hold. Do not open what is sealed. Carry it where it belongs. In the morning, the floor will remember everyone's footprints, but no one will ask it to testify. So the story moves, not with trumpets, but with breathing. If you listen now, you can hear the house celebrate its own competence. The clean knock of wooden cup on wooden table. The thread's decision to find the needle's eye without complaint. The little gasp a curtain makes when a breeze gets the joke. You can hear, beyond the portico, the lower world continue at a pace that does not intimidate sleep. Market voices measured, sandals choosing the middle of the road, water speaking well of stone. Eros returns from an errand and sets his bow where it likes to rest and forgets it there without disaster. Psyche sits beside the lamp that once frightened her and trims it like a gardener who has learned when to stop cutting. Hedone invents a game that consists entirely of looking at the same thing from two sides and laughing at the difference. The gods, who have long practiced in being bored by their own stories, discover that they are not bored here. There is no storm tonight. The sky is clear and still. If sleep wishes to arrive, it will find an open chair and a room that has learned how to keep promises without announcing them. Tomorrow will come with its modest errands, and the story will go on doing the job good stories do when they are told at bedtime, making the mind a gentler room for the body to rest in. There is no storm tonight. The sky is clear and still, and lamplight will do the work of the moon. Days have become honest in the bright house, and honest days have a way of teaching even memory to relax. The rooms know where voices belong. The table remembers which corner softens a long conversation. The little box where Psyche stores proofs from the hours holds a stub of wick, a laurel leaf that did more than it looked able to, a dull pin that no longer catches sleeves, and a pebble Hedone insists is important because it is smooth. Eros leaves his bow in the same good place and forgets it there without disaster. This is not the end of a legend, but the middle of a life, and lives, when they are tended, make peace with middleness. From the portico, where a ribbon of air corrects the hem of Psyche's himation, you can look down into mortal weather and see roofs like sleeping animals, streets like water that learn patience, and you can believe without effort that the world is safest when it is most ordinary. Psyche has learned the deeper craft of the lamp, not merely how to trim a wick or polish a shallow dish of oil, but how to invite a flame to be the size a room deserves. She sets it small for letters written in an unhurried hand to no one and everyone. Reports to the hours themselves about what they did well and what might be improved tomorrow. Sets it a finger taller when Hedone wakes with a question only shadows can ask. Lowers it again when the house wants to practice listening. She understands now that love is not a brilliance to be stared at, but a discipline that teaches the day how to see. The rule that once frightened her, trust first, names later, has changed shape. It is still true, but it has learned new grammar. Trust first, then keep trusting, and recognize that the keeping is the work. Names are still doors, and doors still need hinges. If you oil them every week, they never embarrass the guest. Aphrodite has also learned something, though she would not enjoy hearing it said aloud. She has learned the pleasure of stewardship, which is beauty's adult habit. She does not abandon her mirrors, she angles them. When she sends a task now, it is less a test than a way of polishing a day. Arrange this room so that kindness reflects more readily than criticism. Dress this garden so that bees will think themselves composers. Welcome this guest so she remembers effort, not accident, as the most praiseworthy part of her story. Psyche does these things the way a person breathes when she is not nervous, and the goddess, who has read every gaze and defeated most of them, begins to like the feeling of being pleased without having to pretend she is not. On certain afternoons, she escorts Hedon along the covered walk and permits the child to touch a necklace once, lightly, and to touch nothing else, which is how pleasure learns manners. They return without ceremony. The house notices and approves. Eros comes home by the reliable stair, smelling of olive wind and solved quarrels. If he brings anything, it is never a trophy. It is a story with its noise removed. Today a fisherman untangled his net without swearing. Today 2 cousins decided that memory had exaggerated the insult and undervalued the kindness, so they corrected the math. Today a mother who had forgotten a lullaby found it at the bottom of a drawer where she kept nothing valuable. She hummed anyway, and the child slept. Love's interventions are local and leave no fingerprints except where they improve a latch. He tells these stories the way good bread is passed, and Psyche receives them the way good bread is received. They make themselves a table. On that table lies the small dull pin from the box, and he laughs when he sees it and says, "This is how wars are prevented." And he is not wrong, though the sentence is larger than the object. Not everything is easy, because ease would make people careless. There is a week when Hedon runs a small fever and decides that sleep is an enemy. The house reduces itself to the correct size for such a campaign. Lamps move closer and lower. Voices shorten to fit the throat. Eros carries water. Psyche learns again how to count breaths without forcing them to be regular. A god you would not expect, gray-eyed and practical, arrives with linen and a recipe for tea. The goddess you would expect arranges a curl on her forehead and says nothing. The messenger who never waits ties his sandals and chooses to stay 10 minutes longer than he had planned. In the morning, the fever remembers that it is not nearly as powerful as love performed correctly and retires without apology. A pin goes in the box to represent the night swallowed without a spectacle. The room regains its larger dimensions as if a seamstress had let out a dress, and the day wears it comfortably. Sometimes Psyche dreams the old house that opened for footsteps no one saw. The fountain reciting now. The mosaic dolphins perpetual in their happiness. The way a chair offered itself to her back at the moment it mattered. She wakes and knows what a dream is for. A rehearsal that keeps skills from decaying. In the bright house, she practices the same etiquette toward the hours. The morning wants bread and patience. The noon wants stillness. The afternoon wants small errands, 2 letters, 3 figs, a neat line of swept threshold, and the evening wants gratitude, which is not complicated if you have trimmed wicks and folded cloths properly. At night, she places the lamp where it will do the least and the most at once, high enough to be found in need, small enough not to ask the room to love it. She touches the scar on Eros's shoulder, a history condensed into ornament, and thinks, with a steadiness that feels like sleep, that correction is the best kind of permanence. The city below has become excellent at ordinary goodness, which is the only kind that survives a long winter or a long summer. The lamp seller teaches apprentices the old wisdom about wicks being prayers. The mason fails to overcharge for straightening a step. A shepherd puts a second stone on top of a cairn because 1 was enough but 2 is better. Sisters who once carried advice disguised as worry now carry bread disguised as companionship and leave it at a doorstep with their names not written in the crust. A rumor still tries to live, sometimes, the kind that entertains itself by turning admiration into suspicion, but it starves easily now because fewer mouths feed it. Children invent games that consist of holding their breath and counting how long the fountain can say now without repeating itself, which is foolish and delightful because fountains, by profession, repeat themselves. The gods witness this and do not send thunder. They send weather that makes sweeping pleasant. On a certain evening, you might stand with Psyche at the outer colonnade. The air will be the exact temperature of forgiveness. The line where sea becomes sky will remember how to be clear. Hedon will have decided that the best use of a cup is to put pebbles into it and then pour them out again. Eros will be home, and you will know this without looking because the door has become brilliant at opening the soft way. The household will be rehearsing its competence. Oil on the lamp at the correct depth, bread in its cloth, water in its jar, silence trained like a cat to sit near the chair without leaping. If words are spoken, they will be small words arranged with mastery. Here, now, thank you, yes. The knight understands the assignment. You might be tempted to call this an ending because your breathing has slowed and your attention has no sharp corners. But endings, in stories that mean you well, are simply places where resting is permitted. If you want a moral, choose a small one. Choose the one about boxes that do not belong to you. Carry them close to the place they were sent from, and if you open them by mistake, close them again and carry on. Choose the one about rivers that dislike buckets. Ask an eagle, or failing that, ask the reeds who know when to wait. Choose the one about golden wool, collected after the fierceness has passed, from quiet thorns in shaded places. Choose the one about seeds. Invite ants and attention and do not despise the speed of patient work. Choose the one about lamps. Do not ask a flame to be a revelation. Ask it to be a tool. Choose the one about vows. Say I will. Then practice the verb until it stops being a sentence and becomes a room. The larger moral, if you need it, is only this. Love survives correction. Corrected, it becomes reliable. Reliable, it becomes peace. The bright house will go on doing its humble miracles, keeping water cool, keeping bread honest, teaching footsteps where not to echo. The gods will go on being better when they are quiet. The city will go on raising children who discover that the world believes in them one chore at a time. Somewhere an old tower at the seam between countries will keep leaning 1 degree less, out of pride. Somewhere a black river will continue disliking buckets and admiring eagles. Somewhere a young woman will be told this tale over folded linen and will remember more about lamps than about faces, because lamps are what houses actually need. And somewhere, perhaps here, a listener who has followed us room by room will allow the chair to finish holding them and will allow the night to complete its arithmetic without help. There is no storm tonight. The sky is clear and still. The lamp is the right size for the room. The room is the right size for the heart. The heart is the right size for rest. If sleep wishes to arrive, it will find the door already unlatched and the path already swept, and the house. This house, the one stories build when they mean to be kind, will keep its promise and watch over you until morning is ready to speak. There is no storm tonight. The sky is clear and still, and the lamp can do the work of the moon a little longer. We have walked the quiet parts of Eros and Psyche, errands done without spectacle, rules kept and broken and mended, a house that learned to keep its promise. If you are awake, you may notice how ordinary the ending is. A table that remembers where the bread goes, a door that opens the soft way, a child who teaches hands to be careful. This is the shape love takes when it has been corrected and decides to stay. Let the room settle. Let your breath find its slower measure. The story is finished with you for now, and it will finish without you if sleep is already doing its work. If your eyes are still open, you can let them rest on the darkness and think of small, useful things. A trimmed wick, a folded cloth, a step made level, a cup of water left for a passerby. These are the quiet tools that keep the world in order. They are also the right size for dreams. When morning is ready, it will arrive politely. Until then, there is nothing to hold up and nothing to hold back. Lie as you are. Breathe as you are. The house will watch the door. The road will wait. The lamp is the right size for the room, and the room is the right size for rest. Sleep well. Good night.